At dinner, they mocked me in French, thinking I did not understand a single word, because to them I was just a broke old man with a worn-out coat. But they did not know. I had lived in Paris for 15 years, serving my country. I stayed silent that night, swallowing their insults along with my cheap wine. Days later, I slid a single envelope across the table and watched the color drain from my son-in-law's face as he realized the game was over. Before I tell you how I brought their fake empire crumbling down, let me know where you are watching from. In the comments below, hit like and subscribe. If you have ever had to sit in silence while someone underestimated you. My name is Luther King, 71 years old, and for the last decade I have been invisible. I am a ghost in my own family, a shadow that pays the bills but gets no seat at the head of the table. To my daughter Maya, I am just her aging father, a retired Army logistics man living on a pension. To her husband Preston, I am a relic, a burden. Something to be tolerated until I finally kick the bucket and leave behind my modest house. But Preston made a fatal calculation. He judged the book by its dusty cover. He saw my calloused hands and my old Toyota and assumed I was simple. He assumed I was poor. He had no idea that the man sitting across from him had built an $8 million real estate portfolio from the ground up, starting in 1980. It was a Tuesday evening when the war began. We were at Le Jardin, the most pretentious French restaurant in the city. It was the kind of place where the menu had no prices and the waiters looked at you like you were dirt. If you did not pronounce the wine list correctly, Preston had insisted on this dinner. He said it was to celebrate a big contract for his advertising firm, but I knew better. He wanted to show off for his parents, Richard and Sylvia, who had flown in from the coast. I sat at the far end of the table, squeezing my knees together because the chair was too small. The table was covered in white linen so bright it hurt my eyes. Preston sat at the head, of course, wearing a suit that cost more than my first car. His parents were on either side of him, dripping in gold jewelry that rattled every time they moved. Richard was a loud man with a face red from too much bourbon, and Sylvia was a woman who smiled with her teeth but never her eyes. Then there was Maya, my sweet Maya. She sat next to Preston, looking small. She used to have a fire in her belly, used to be the girl who climbed trees and scraped her knees, but now she looked like a porcelain doll afraid to break. She spent the whole dinner trying to make herself invisible, nodding at everything Preston said. The waiter poured wine, a vintage Bordeaux, for Preston and his parents. For me, Preston had ordered a house red, the cheapest thing on the menu. He did not think I noticed. He thought I would not know the difference. Preston raised his glass, the crystal catching the light. He looked around the restaurant, making sure other people were watching him. Then he looked at me. A smirk curled the corner of his lip. He swirled his wine and spoke to his father in French. Le vieux singe ne sait pas qu'il boit du vinaigre. The old monkey does not know he is drinking vinegar. My hand tightened around the stem of my glass. I felt the cold glass against my palm. I looked at the dark liquid inside. It was vinegar compared to what they were drinking, but that was not what made my blood boil. It was the word singe. Monkey. It was a word loaded with a history that a man like Preston could never understand. A word that stripped away my dignity and reduced me to an animal. I saw Richard chuckle. He took a sip of his expensive wine and winked at his son. Sylvia covered her mouth with a napkin, giggling like a schoolgirl. Maya frowned. She looked between her husband and her father, confusion clouding her eyes. "What did you say, honey?" Maya asked, her voice trembling slightly. I took a sip of my wine. It was sour, acidic. It burned my throat. But I swallowed it. I kept my face completely still, a mask of stone. I had learned that stillness in the trenches of Belgium. I had learned it in the negotiation rooms in Paris. I learned that when the enemy reveals himself, you do not fire back immediately. You wait. You mark his position. Sylvia waved her hand, dismissing Maya's question. "Oh, darling, Preston was just saying how much he admires your father. He said Luther has such a peaceful demeanor, the way he sits so quietly enjoying his drink. It is poetic, really. A lie. A bold, flat-faced lie." I slowly placed my glass down on the table. I looked at Sylvia, then at Preston. I forced the corners of my mouth up into a small, confused smile, the smile of a senile old man who is just happy to be included. "Thank you," I said, my voice raspy. That is very kind of you, Preston. Eyes lit up with triumph. He thought he had won. He thought I was stupid, ignorant, helpless. He turned back to his parents and launched into a story about his creative genius at the agency. Speaking in English now, loud enough for the next table to hear, for the next hour I sat there and let them dissect me. They switched back and forth between English and French, thinking they had a secret code. Whenever they wanted to say something cruel, they switched to the language of love. "Regardez sa veste," Richard said, pointing at my tweed jacket with his fork. "Look at his jacket. It smells like mothballs and failure." "Il ne devrait pas être ici," Sylvia replied, sipping her soup. "He should not be here. We should put him in a home somewhere cheap. The smell of old people ruins my appetite." I ate my bread. I chewed slowly. Staring at the centerpiece, I recorded every word. I filed away every insult in the cabinet of my mind. I remembered the grammar, the syntax, the accent. Preston accent was terrible, flat and Americanized. He sounded like a tourist reading from a guidebook, but I did not correct him. Not yet. Then came the bill. The waiter placed the leather folder on the table. Preston grabbed it with a flourish. He opened it, and I saw his eyes widen just a fraction. $1,800 for a Tuesday dinner. He pulled out his platinum credit card and handed it to the waiter with a dismissive wave. "Keep the change," Preston said loud enough for the waitress 3 tables away to hear. We waited. Richard and Sylvia were talking about their summer home in the Hamptons. A house I knew for a fact was currently facing foreclosure, according to the public records my lawyer Saul had pulled that morning, but they kept talking, spinning their web of lies. The waiter returned. He leaned down and whispered something to Preston. Preston's face turned a shade of pink that matched the salmon on his plate. He cleared his throat and tapped the card on the table. "There must be a mistake," Preston said loudly. "This chip is faulty. It happens all the time with these high-limit cards. The magnetic strip gets demagnetized." The waiter looked uncomfortable. "Sir." I tried it 3 times. It was declined by the bank. Silence fell over the table. The air became thick and heavy. Richard looked at his watch, suddenly very interested in the time Sylvia began adjusting her diamond necklace, avoiding eye contact. Preston let out a nervous laugh. He patted his pockets, creating a show of searching for another wallet. "I seem to have left my other wallet in the Benz." He looked at Maya. "You have your card, babe." Maya looked down at her lap, shame coloring her cheeks. "Preston, you know you maxed out my card last week for the office furniture." Preston's jaw tightened. He looked at his parents. "Mom, Dad, do you have—" Richard coughed loudly, clearing his throat. "Actually, son, I am moving some assets around right now. My accounts are temporarily frozen for a security audit. You know how the IRS gets when you move large sums." "Of course," Preston said quickly. "Of course." Then slowly, inevitably, all eyes turned to me, the old monkey at the end of the table. Preston's smile returned, but it was tight, strained. "Hey, Pops," Preston said, his voice dripping with false camaraderie. "You got this right. I will pay you back tomorrow as soon as I sort out this chip issue. It is just a little cash flow hiccup." I looked at him. I looked at the 3 of them. The wolves in designer clothing cornered by a piece of paper. I did not say a word. I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket. I pulled out a thick envelope. It was not a sleek leather wallet. It was a white paper envelope, beat up and wrinkled. I opened it and pulled out a stack of cash. Hundreds, 50s, 20s. It was the emergency fund. I always carried a habit from the army. You never know when you need to move. I started counting the bills onto the pristine white tablecloth. The bills were old, soft, worn. They did not look like the crisp money Preston liked. They looked like work. They looked like sweat. They looked like 40 years of labor. 100, 200, 300. I counted slowly, licking my thumb, systematically. The waiter watched patiently. Richard wrinkled his nose as if the money itself smelled bad. "Look at that," Sylvia whispered in French to Richard. "He carries cash, like a drug dealer or a peasant." How embarrassing. I paused. I held a $50 bill in midair. I looked at Sylvia. She froze. I held her gaze for a second, just long enough to make her heart skip a beat. Then I dropped the bill onto the pile. $1,800, I said, pushing the pile toward the waiter, plus $200 for the tip, because dealing with this table cannot be easy. The waiter nodded respectfully and took the money. Preston let out a breath he had been holding. He adjusted his tie, regaining his arrogance instantly. "Thanks," Luther, Preston said, not even looking at me. You are a lifesaver, seriously. I will Venmo you. He stood up, signaling that the dinner was over. He did not wait for me. He did not help me with my chair. He walked out with his parents, laughing about some joke Richard made, leaving Maya and me trailing behind. The ride home was quiet. Maya drove. Preston sat in the passenger seat, texting, furiously, probably trying to move money around to hide the fact that he was broke. I sat in the back, staring out the window at the city lights. They thought I was asleep. They thought I was just the old baggage in the back seat. When we pulled into the driveway of my house, the house I bought 30 years ago, the house Preston and Maya had moved into last week because their apartment was undergoing renovations. Renovations that were actually an eviction notice. I got out slowly. I walked straight to my room. I did not say goodnight. I did not look at them. I closed my bedroom door and locked it. I went to my desk and opened the bottom drawer. Inside was a small leather-bound notebook. It was the same notebook I had used in 1972 in logistics. It was the same notebook I used to track my first real estate deal. I sat down under the yellow light of the desk lamp. I picked up my fountain pen. I opened to a fresh page. My hand did not shake. My handwriting was neat, sharp, precise. I wrote, the date. Then I wrote in French, Le gendre a ri le vieux singe a payé, mais le singe tient le chéquier. The son-in-law laughed. The old monkey paid, but the monkey holds the checkbook. I closed the book. The game had begun. They wanted to speak French. Fine, we would speak French, but they had forgotten one thing. In war, you do not just learn the enemy language. You learn his secrets. And I was about to give them a lesson they would never forget. 3 days later, the war came to my doorstep, literally. It was 7 in the morning, a time when I usually sit on my porch with black coffee, watching the sun come up over the neighborhood I helped build. But that morning, the silence was shattered by the aggressive honking of a moving truck backing into my driveway. I set my mug down on the railing, the ceramic making a sharp clink against the wood, and walked to the front door. My heart was already beating a little faster, not from fear, but from a soldier instinct that told me the enemy was breaching the perimeter. When I opened the door, I found Preston standing there sweating in a designer tracksuit that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. He was dragging 2 massive Louis Vuitton suitcases up my steps, the wheels thumping loudly against the wood. Maya was behind him carrying a box of shoes and looking like she wanted the ground to open up and swallow her whole. She refused to make eye contact with me, staring intently at her boots. "Surprise, Pops!" Preston shouted, his voice too loud for the morning calm. "We are roommates now. Is not that exciting? Grab this bag, will you? It weighs a ton." I did not move. I stood in the doorway, blocking his path with my body. I might be 71, but I am 6'2", and I spent 20 years moving crates of ammunition. I do not move unless I want to. "What is going on here?" I asked, my voice calm and low. Preston let out an exaggerated sigh and dropped the suitcases on my porch. He wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, looking annoyed that I was asking questions instead of acting like a bellhop. Disaster, Pops. Total disaster. Our apartment complex had a massive plumbing failure. A pipe burst right above our unit. The landlord said it is going to take weeks to fix the water damage. Black mold, the whole 9 yards. It is a health hazard, seriously. So I told Maya, pack the bags. We are going to stay with your dad. He has plenty of empty rooms collecting dust. He tried to push past me, but I held my ground. I looked at Maya. "Is that true, Maya?" I asked. She flinched. She finally looked up, and I saw the red-rimmed eyes of a woman who had been crying all night. "Yes, Daddy," she whispered. Her voice was thin, brittle. "It is just for a little while, just until the repairs are done." I knew a lie when I heard one. I worked in logistics. I dealt with contractors and landlords for decades. Plumbing disasters do not require you to move your entire wardrobe in a U-Haul truck at dawn. But I stepped aside. I let the wolves into the sheepfold because I needed them. Close, I needed to see exactly how deep the rot went. "Come in," I said. For the next 3 hours, my quiet sanctuary was turned into a chaotic warehouse. Preston barked orders at the movers, directing them to pile boxes in my living room, completely blocking the television and my favorite armchair. He walked around my house with his shoes on, tracking mud across the carpets my late wife had chosen. He critiqued everything. The lighting was too dim, The smell was too old. The layout was inefficient. I retreated to the kitchen, making a fresh pot of coffee and listening. My hearing is not what it used to be, but it is still sharp enough, especially when people think I am just a senile old man tinkering with a coffee pot. I heard them in the hallway. Preston's voice was a harsh whisper vibrating with anger. "You better stop crying, Maya," he hissed. "He will hear you. Get it together." "I just feel bad, Preston," Maya sobbed quietly. "Lying to him like this. He is my father. He is a resource." "Maya," Preston corrected her. That word made my hand freeze over the coffee filter. "A resource. We need a place to stay and he has a free house. Stop being sentimental. We would be on the street if it were not for me thinking fast. The marshal was coming at noon today. Maya, do you understand that?" Noon? I poured the water slowly, not letting a single drop spill. So that was it. The plumbing story was garbage. They were evicted. I walked softly to the doorway just out of sight, hiding in the shadows of the dining room. "I cannot believe we owe that much," Maya whispered. "How did it get to $18,000? "Preston, you told me you paid the rent. You said the business accounts were handling it," Preston scoffed. $18,000 is nothing, Maya. It is a temporary cash flow issue. The landlord is just being a prick. He does not understand how business works. I was going to pay him next month when the client checks cleared. But no, he had to file for eviction. He humiliated me. And now we have to live in this museum with your dad, smelling like mothballs. $18,000. My daughter was homeless because her husband could not pay rent for 6 months. And yet he was driving a leased Mercedes and wearing a watch that could have paid for 3 months of housing. I went back to the kitchen and drank my coffee. Black, bitter, hot. I needed the bitterness to keep me focused. They were not just guests. They were invaders, and invaders always try to conquer territory. I went out to the garden for a few hours, tending to my roses. It was my way of cooling down, knowing that if I stayed inside, I might say something that would reveal my hand too soon. When I came back inside around noon, the house was suspiciously quiet. The movers had gone. The boxes were still piled high in the living room. I walked down the hallway toward my study. It was the room at the end of the hall, the only room in the house I kept locked, usually. It was my sanctuary. It was where I kept my records, my books, and the few mementos from my time in service. It was where I listened to jazz and read my investment reports. The door was wide open. My heart hammered against my ribs. I walked faster, my boots thudding against the floorboards. When I stepped inside, the breath left my lungs. Preston was sitting in my chair, my leather chair, the chair I had sat in for 20 years. He had his feet up on my mahogany desk, feet clad in dirty sneakers. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was the floor. Scattered everywhere were my vinyl records, my original pressings of Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Thelonious Monk albums I had bought in Paris in the 70s. Albums that were not just music but chapters of my life. They were tossed into a pile of black trash bags like garbage. Preston was busy screwing a mounting arm onto my desk. A massive, sleek Apple monitor sat waiting on the floor, wires snaking everywhere like vipers. "What are you doing?" I asked. My voice was low, but it vibrated with a rage I hadn't felt since 1968. Preston spun around in the chair holding a screwdriver. He did not look guilty. He looked annoyed that I had interrupted him. "Oh, hey, Pops." He gestured around the room with the screwdriver, giving me a condescending smile. "I am upgrading you." This room was a dungeon. It was depressing, dark, and full of junk. I need a workspace if I am going to be living here. I need light. I need speed. So I am setting up my command center. He kicked one of the trash bags stuffed with my records. "And honestly, Pops, I am doing you a favor, clearing out this trash. This stuff is a fire hazard. Who even listens to this noise anymore? It is just screeching trumpets. I am going to set you up with a Spotify account. Welcome to the 21st century trash." He called my life trash. I looked at the record on top of the bag. It was Kind of Blue. My wife had given me that record for our first anniversary. The corner of the sleeve was bent where he had shoved it in. I walked over to the bag. I moved slowly, deliberately, playing the part of the old man with stiff joints. I crouched down and pulled the record out, smoothing the cover with my thumb. "This is not trash," I said quietly. "This is my office." Preston laughed, a short barking sound. "Not anymore, Pops. Look, be realistic. You do not do any work. You are retired, you sit in here and nap. I run a company. I generate revenue. I need this space efficient. I need it modern. Consider this, my rent payment. I am increasing the property value by modernizing the interior. You should be thanking me." He turned back to his monitor, dismissing me completely. "Just leave the bags in the hall. The movers can take them to the dump tomorrow." I stood up, clutching the record to my chest. I wanted to grab him by his designer collar and throw him through the window. I wanted to tell him that this desk he was scratching with his equipment was where I signed the deal for the King Tower. I wanted to tell him that the man he was talking to could buy and sell his entire pathetic existence before lunch, but I did not. Remembered the notebook. I remembered the long game. "Okay," I said. My voice cracked perfectly, sounding defeated and weak. "Okay, Preston, just please be careful with the desk." Preston did not even turn around. Yeah, sure. Close the door on your way out, Pops. I have a Zoom call in 10 minutes. I walked out carrying the bag of records with me. I took them to the basement. My new exile, I spent the next hour carefully taking them out, checking for scratches, cleaning the dust off their covers, apologizing to each one of them for the disrespect they had endured. I was shaking, not from age, but from the effort of holding back my fury. Around 4 in the afternoon, I went to the kitchen to get a glass of water. The trash can was overflowing. Preston had thrown away the remnants of his lunch takeout containers from a sushi place nearby, along with a bunch of papers from his pockets. I saw a crumpled ball of yellow paper sitting on top of a soy sauce stain. It looked official. I looked around the kitchen, was empty. I could hear Preston shouting on a call in my study, claiming he was the CEO of a media empire. I could hear Maya crying softly in the guest bedroom. I reached into the trash and pulled out the yellow ball of paper. I smoothed it out on the counter. My hands were steady now. The soldier was back in command. It was not just an eviction notice. It was a court summons issued 3 days ago. Defendant Preston Miller and Maya King, plaintiff, City National Bank. I scanned the document, reading the legal jargon I knew so well. The lawsuit was for breach of contract and default on a business loan. But it was the number at the bottom that made me stop breathing for a second. Total amount due immediately, including penalties and interest, $145,000. I stared at the number. It was not just rent. It was everything. He was drowning. He had leveraged everything he had, which was nothing, and now the sharks were circling. I looked up toward the ceiling, toward the room where he was currently destroying my sanctuary. He was not just an arrogant fool, he was a desperate man. And desperate men are dangerous. They do not just invade territory, they scorch the earth. I folded the summons and put it in my pocket, right next to my notebook. He wanted a modern space. He wanted to play businessman. I washed my hands, drying them slowly on a dish towel. "Preston Miller," I whispered to the empty kitchen. "You want to modernize my house? Fine, but you forgot one thing. You never tear down a load-bearing wall unless you want the roof to collapse on your head, and I was the roof." I took the yellow paper to the basement and locked it in my safe. The file on my son-in-law was growing thicker by the hour. The $18,000 for rent was just the appetizer. The main course was $145,000 of debt, and I had a feeling he was going to try to make me pay the bill. Let him get comfortable. Let him set up his Apple computer. Let him think he is conquered. The old man territory, because the higher he climbs, the harder he is going to fall, and I will be there to watch him hit the ground. By Friday afternoon, my house was no longer my house. It was a occupied territory. The silence I had cultivated for years, the quiet rhythm of reading in my armchair and listening to the hum of the refrigerator, was shattered by the screeching of tires in the driveway. I was in the kitchen peeling potatoes for a stew when the front door banged open violently, hitting the wall with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. Richard and Sylvia had arrived. They did not knock. They did not ring the bell. They simply barged in as if they owned the deed to the property, carrying with them a cloud of expensive perfume and the loud braying laughter of people who think the world exists solely for their entertainment. "Luther," Richard bellowed, dropping a leather weekend bag right in the middle of the hallway, blocking the path to the bathroom. "Good God, man, it is stuffy in here. Do you not believe in air conditioning? Cranking it up is the first thing on my list." Sylvia followed him, looking around my living room with her nose wrinkled as if she had just stepped into a subway station. She was wearing a white fur coat, even though it was 60 degrees out. "Oh, Richard, be nice," Sylvia chirped. though her voice lacked any real warmth. She walked over to my windows and yanked the curtains open, letting the harsh afternoon sun glare off the television screen. We just need to breathe a little life into this place. It feels like a mausoleum. I stood in the kitchen doorway holding a potato peeler, my grip tightening until my knuckles turned the color of ash. "Hello, Richard." "Hello, Sylvia," I said, my voice steady. "I did not know you were coming this weekend." Preston came bounding down the stairs wearing a silk bathrobe at 2 in the afternoon, ignoring the fact that I was fully dressed and working. "Surprise, Pops." Preston grinned, clapping his father on the back. "Mom and Dad are going to crash. Here for the weekend." The hotel they usually stay at had a booking error. Can you believe it? Totally incompetent staff. So I said, "Hey, we have plenty of room at the estate. Come on over the estate." He called my 3-bedroom brick house built with VA loans and overtime pay an estate. It was a joke to them, a plaything. For the next 6 hours, I became invisible in my own home. They took over the living room, pushing my recliner into the corner to make room for a portable bar they had brought in from their car. They turned on the stereo, blasting pop music that shook the floorboards. Richard poured drinks, heavy-handed with the scotch that I noticed came from a bottle of Blue Label I had been saving for my 75th birthday. I watched from the kitchen as Richard cracked the seal on that bottle, a bottle that cost $200, and poured half of it into a tumbler like it was tap water. I said nothing. I turned back to my stew, the rhythmic chopping of the knife against the cutting. Board was the only thing keeping me from walking out there and throwing them all out onto the street. Chop, chop, chop. I focused on the onions. I focused on the celery. I focused on the discipline that the army had drilled into my bones. Discipline is not about what you do when things are easy. It is about what you do when the enemy is in your wire and you have to hold your fire until the command is given. Around 7:00, I brought out the stew. I had set the dining table, but they were not interested in sitting down. They were sprawled on the sofas, laughing at some story Richard was telling about cheating on his taxes. "Oh, Luther, just put it on the coffee table." Sylvia waved a hand at me without looking. "We are having a cocktail hour. We do not need a formal dinner. Just bring us some bowls and napkins and try not to spill anything on the rug." I served them. I ladled my beef stew into bowls and handed it to them like a servant in a period drama. Preston did not say thank you. He just took the bowl and continued complaining about his employees. Then it happened. Richard stood up, swaying slightly from the whiskey. He walked over to the mantelpiece above the fireplace. This was the one area of the house Preston had not yet touched, mostly because I had told him that if he moved anything on that shelf, he would find himself sleeping in the yard. On that mantelpiece sat a small glass display case. Inside, on a bed of velvet, lay my service medals, the Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, the Good Conduct Medal, and my rank patches. Master Sergeant Richard squinted at the case, tapping the glass with his heavy gold ring. Clink, clink, clink. "So, Luther." Richard boomed his voice, slurring slightly. "Preston tells me you were a logistics guy. Supply chain. Moving boxes, right?" I stood by the kitchen door, wiping my hands on a dish towel. I was in logistics. Yes, but in a war zone, logistics means driving a truck through a valley while snipers are taking shots at your tires. It means delivering ammo to a fire base, while mortars are walking up the hill towards you. I served 20 years. "Richard," I said quietly. Richard laughed, a wet, condescending sound. He picked up the case, tilting it so the metals slid slightly out of place. 20 years, and this is all you got. A few pieces of colored ribbon and some tin stars. You know my grandfather was a general. Now that was a real soldier. These things." He tapped the glass again, hard enough that I worried it would crack. "These look like something you buy at a pawn shop. Honestly, Luther, it is peacetime now. The Cold War is over. Nobody cares about this old junk anymore. How much do you think this scrap metal would fetch on eBay? $50. Maybe enough to buy a nice dinner." My blood ran cold. It was a coldness that started in my toes and worked its way up to my chest, freezing my lungs. It was the same coldness I felt in the Ardennes forest in the winter of '71. "That is not scrap metal," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "That Purple Heart is for the shrapnel." Took in my leg, Pulling a man out of a burning jeep, Richard waved his hand, dismissing my history as if it were a boring television commercial. Relax, Luther. I am just teasing. You military guys are so sensitive. No sense of humor. He put the case back down, but he put it down, crooked. The corner of the case hung off the edge of the mantelpiece, threatening to fall. Then he turned to Preston and Sylvia. He leaned in, thinking the loud music in my distance would cover his words. He switched to French, the language of their conspiracy. Il faut le mettre en maison de retraite. Ce vieux fou devient agressif. Regarde. Comment il me regarde? I stood perfectly still. My face was a mask of indifference. Inside my head, the translation was instantaneous, automatic. He must be put in a nursing home. This old fool is becoming aggressive. Look at how he looks at me. Sylvia giggled, sipping her drink, and replied in French. Oui, bientôt. Une fois que nous aurons la signature pour la maison, nous l'enverrons à l'établissement de l'État, pas le privé. C'est trop cher pour ce qu'il vaut, yes soon. Once we have the signature for the house, we will send him to the state facility, not the private one. It is too expensive for what he is worth. They were discussing discarding me like a used napkin right in front of my face, discussing sending me to a state-run facility, a place where old people go to die in urine-soaked sheets, simply because they wanted to save money on my care after stealing my home. I looked at Preston, my son-in-law, the man I had welcomed into my family, the man I had helped when he started his first business. He was nodding, laughing along with them. D'accord, Preston said, smelling his whiskey. C'est le plan. Lundi, envoie l'avocat. Agreed. That is the plan. Monday, we see the lawyer. I turned around and walked back into the kitchen. I did not slam the door. I did not throw the plates. I picked up the sponge and I started washing the pot. I washed it slowly, deliberately, scrubbing in circles, watching the soap suds turn gray with the grease from the stew. Monday, they had a timeline, they had a plan, and they had insulted my honor, my service, and my sanity. I finished cleaning the kitchen at 10 o'clock. By then the living room was quiet. Richard and Sylvia had passed out on the sofas, mouths open, snoring loudly. Preston and Maya had retreated upstairs, presumably to argue in whispers about money again. I walked past the sleeping forms of the invaders. Richard's arm was hanging off the sofa, his hand dangling just inches above the floor where he had dropped an empty glass. I looked at the mantelpiece. I walked over and gently straightened the display case. I wiped the smudge of Richard's fingerprint off the glass with my sleeve. Sleep well, Richard, I whispered. You are going to need the rest. I went down to the basement to my exile quarters. I locked the door and sat on the cot I had set up next to the furnace. It was cold down there, but I did not feel it. I pulled out my burner phone, a cheap, prepaid flip phone I kept for emergencies. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang twice. Yeah, came the gruff voice on the other end. It was Saul Status, I asked. It is late, Otis, Saul grumbled, but I could hear the rustling of papers. He was awake. He was always awake. Are you safe? They are in the house, I said. They are drinking my scotch and planning to commit me on Monday. They called my medals scrap metal Saul. They called me an aggressive old fool. There was a silence on the line. Then Saul's voice came back harder, sharper. Give the word, Otis. I have the file right here. What did you find on Richard and Sylvia? I asked. Saul laughed, a dry barking sound that warmed my heart. You are going to love this, Otis. Your high society in-laws. They are not just broke. They are frauds. Richard has 3 lawsuits pending for a Ponzi scheme he tried to run in Florida involving timeshares. Sylvia has a warrant for writing bad checks in Nevada. They are not here to visit you, Otis. They are hiding. They are on the run from process servers. I closed my eyes and a smile slowly spread across my face. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a hunter who just saw the prey step into the trap. So they need my house. Not just for the money, but for a hideout, I said. Exactly, Saul said. And if they try to commit you, they can get power of attorney and use your assets to pay off their legal fees. It is a desperate hail. Mary pass, Otis. Monday, I said. Monday is when they bring their lawyer. Good Saul said. Let them bring him. I will be there too. And Otis. Yeah, wear your medals on Monday. I hung up the phone. I laid back on the cot, staring at the exposed pipes on the ceiling overhead. I could hear the floorboards creak as one of them got up to use the bathroom. They thought I was trapped. They thought I was a senile old man cornered in his own basement, but they forgot one thing. When you corner a soldier, you do not trap him. You just put him in a fighting position. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. The mission was a go. The intel was solid, and on Monday the ambush would be sprung. Sunday morning brought a deceptive calm to the house. The invaders were sleeping late, recovering from their night of drinking and plotting. I was awake at 5 as usual. My internal clock set by decades of military service and early morning logistics shifts. The house used to be my sanctuary on Sundays, a time for jazz coffee and the Sunday paper. Now it felt like a command post that had been overrun by enemy forces. I moved quietly through the hallway, avoiding the squeaky floorboards. I knew by heart, floorboards that Preston stomped on without a care in the world. I went out to the back porch to oil my boots. It was a simple task, a repetitive motion that calmed my nerves, but my peace did not last long. Around 10 o'clock, I heard the sliding glass door of the sunroom open. The sunroom was directly above where I was sitting, sheltered by the trellis of wisteria I had planted 30 years ago. I could see them, but they could not see me. I was just part of the scenery, the old man in the garden. Preston walked out onto the balcony, talking loudly into his phone. He was pacing. I could hear the nervous energy in his footsteps, the click of his expensive loafers against the tile. "Yes, I know the market is fluctuating," Preston said, his voice slick and eager. "But you have to understand the location. We are talking about a corner lot in the historic district. The zoning laws just changed last month, allowing for high-density residential development. This is not just a house, it is a gold mine." I stopped rubbing the oil into the leather of my boot. My hand froze. The zoning laws had indeed changed. I knew that because I was the one who had petitioned the city council for the change 6 months ago as part of a long-term investment strategy for the neighborhood. Preston thought he was educating a real estate agent, but he was just regurgitating information he had probably skimmed off a headline. I listened closer. "Look." Preston lowered his voice, but in the quiet morning air it carried perfectly. "I need a valuation by Tuesday, not a drive-by appraisal. I need the full number. The big number. I am estimating 1.5 million conservatively. If we tear down the existing structure and sell the land with the permits, tear down." He wanted to tear down the house where I raised my daughter, the house where my wife took her last breath, the house that I had paid for with sweat and blood, not to mention the fact that under the current market conditions which I followed daily, the land was actually worth 1.8 million if you negotiated correctly. But Preston was desperate. He was ready to sell low just to get his hands on quick cash. I heard the sliding door open again. Lighter footsteps followed Maya. "Who are you talking to?" "Preston," Maya asked. Her voice sounded tired, thin. Preston hung up the phone quickly. "Oh, just a consultant, babe. Business strategy regarding the expansion of the agency." Liar, he was lying to her face with the ease of a sociopath, Preston, Maya said. And I could hear the hesitation in her voice. I found the brochure on the kitchen counter. The one for Sunset Pines, assisted living. Why was it there? I leaned back against the brick wall of the house, closing my eyes. Here it comes. The pitch. Preston sighed a long, dramatic exhale, implying that he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Babe, we need to be realistic. Your dad is 71. He is not getting any younger. Did you see him yesterday?" He stared at a wall for 20 minutes. He forgot to turn off the bathroom light. He is slipping. Maya, it is classic, early-stage dementia. I clenched my jaw. I had stared at the wall because I was calculating the compound interest on my municipal bonds in my head. And I left the light on because the switch is sticky and needs replacing, something I would have done if my tools were not buried under his boxes. "I do not think it is that bad," Preston, Maya argued weakly. Mrs. Mom, he is lonely. He is not invalid." Preston's voice changed. It became soft, manipulative, the voice of a snake charming a bird. "Maya, listen to me. I love Luther. You know I do. But this house, it is too much for him. It is a death trap. Stairs, old wiring, drafts. It is dangerous. And frankly, It is selfish of us to keep him here just because we are attached to the memories. Sunset Pines is not a nursing home. It is a resort. They have chefs' activities, medical staff on call 24/7. He would be happy there. He would be safe. He paused, letting the silence do the work. And think about us, Maya. Think about the kids we want to have. If we sell this place, the agent says we could get 1.5 million. Do you know what we could do with that? We could pay off the debts, invest in the agency, secure our future. We could buy a modern house in the suburbs, one with a nursery. He was using my unborn grandchildren as leverage. He was trading my life for a hypothetical nursery and a house he would probably lose to foreclosure in a year. Anyway, Maya was silent for a long time. Finally, she whispered, "But it is his house, Preston. He built his life here. It is an asset." "Maya," Preston said, his voice hardening just a fraction, "and right now it is a wasting asset. If he falls down those stairs and breaks a hip, the state will take everything for medical bills. We have to act now, preemptively. It is the only responsible thing to do. We are doing this for him. For him." The audacity was breathtaking. He was framing his greed as an act of charity. I did not hear Maya's response. She probably nodded, defeated. She always crumbled when he used that tone, that mixture of authority and false concern. They went back inside, leaving the balcony empty. I sat there for a long time, staring at my boots. The oil had soaked in, leaving the leather dark and supple. So that was the plan. Sell the house pocket, the millions, and dump the old man in a facility that smelled of bleach and despair. I finished my boots. I laced them up tight. Then I stood up. I was not going to Sunset Pines, and my house was not going to be torn down to pay for Preston gambling debts. I walked into the house, entering through the back door. The kitchen was empty. They had gone upstairs, probably to look at Zillow listings and dream about spending my money. I walked down the hallway toward the dining room. The table was cluttered with Preston papers. He treated every surface in my house as his personal desk. I walked over to the table, intending to clear away a coffee cup he had left there, but something caught my eye. A manila folder sat on top of a stack of magazines. It was not the brochure for the nursing home. It was something more official, something legal. I looked up the stairs. Silence. I could hear the shower running in the master bathroom. They were occupied. I reached out and opened the folder. My heart stopped for a second, then started beating a slow, heavy rhythm of pure rage. It was a legal draft. A petition. Petition for guardianship of incapacitated person. Petitioner, Preston Miller. Proposed ward, Luther King. I scanned the legal jargon. The clauses were vicious. They claimed I was unable to manage my financial affairs, unable to make medical decisions, and that I posed a risk to myself. The evidence cited was a list of fabricated incidents. Luther King was found wandering the yard in confusion. Luther King left the gas stove on. Luther King became aggressive when confronted. Lies, all lies. But the most damning part was the timeline. The date on the draft was from 2 weeks ago, before the plumbing incident, before they moved in. This was not a reaction to a sudden decline in my health. This was a premeditated extraction. They had planned this. They had targeted me. They did not just want the house. They wanted me legally erased. They wanted to strip me of my rights to sign my name, to vote, to access my own bank accounts. They wanted to reduce me to a child, a ward of the state, with Preston as my keeper, holding the keys to everything I owned. I looked at the signature line at the bottom. It was blank, waiting for a judge stamp. I closed the folder. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of combat. I heard the water stop upstairs. The shower was over. They would be coming down soon. I placed the folder back exactly where it was, aligning the edges with the magazine underneath. I stepped back. I was no longer just a father-in-law who was being disrespected. I was a target in a hostile takeover. But Preston had made a critical error in his dossier. He assumed the target was undefended. He assumed the target was weak. He did not know that the target had a lawyer named Saul who was currently drafting a counteroffensive that would make this petition look like a kindergarten drawing. I turned and walked toward the basement, my heavy boots making no sound on the rug. "You want a war, Preston?" I whispered to the empty room. "You want to play with the law? Fine." I went down to my safe and pulled out a fresh stack of cash and a separate secure phone. It was time to make a call to France. It was time to call in a favor from an old friend who specialized in forensic accounting. If they wanted to prove I was incompetent, I was going to prove they were criminal. And I would do it before the ink on that petition ever had a chance to dry. In the Army, they teach you that the best camouflage is not a ghillie suit or face paint. The best camouflage is giving the enemy exactly what he expects to see. If he expects a tiger, you hide. If he expects a harmless rabbit, you graze in the open and wait until he lowers his rifle. Preston and his parents expected a senile, old man, a decaying relic whose mind was leaking out of his ears like water from a cracked bucket. So I decided to give them a performance worthy of an Academy Award. I call it the fog of war strategy. It started on Tuesday morning. The house was quiet. The invaders were still asleep, nursing their hangovers from another night of drinking my liquor. I went into the kitchen and turned on the gas burner on the stove. I did not light it. I just let the valve hiss, a soft serpentine sound releasing the smell of rotten eggs into the air. Then I walked over to the kitchen table, sat down, and stared blankly at a spot on the wall, waiting. 10 minutes later, Preston came rushing down the stairs wearing his silk pajamas, sniffing the air like a bloodhound. "Jesus Christ!" he yelled, running into the kitchen. "Are you trying to kill us all, Pops?" He twisted the knob off violently, then spun around to face me. I did not flinch. I did not look at him with the sharp glare I usually reserved for his stupidity. Instead, I blinked slowly, my mouth hanging slightly open, my hands resting limp in my lap. "What is that smell?" I asked, my voice shaky and thin. "Did someone make eggs?" Preston stared at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. It was the look of a man who just found a winning lottery ticket in the gutter. "You left the gas on, Luther," he said, talking to me like I was a toddler. "You almost blew up the house. Do you understand?" "Gas boom dead?" I furrowed my brow, acting confused. I was just going to make tea. I must have forgotten the match. Forgotten. Preston let out a harsh laugh. "You forgot fire. This is exactly what I was talking about. This is dangerous. You are dangerous." He pulled out his phone, immediately texting furiously, probably alerting Maya and his parents that the plan was proceeding ahead of schedule. I sat there looking at my hands, feeling a deep burning shame in my gut. Not because of the act, but because I had to degrade myself to catch a rat. But in war, you crawl through mud to reach the objective. The next phase of my operation was harder. It required collateral damage. It required hurting the only person in that house I actually loved. Wednesday evening, Maya came home early from her part-time job. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, the stress of living with 3 narcissists weighing her down. She walked into the living room where I was sitting pretending to watch a game show with the volume turned up too high. "Hi, Daddy," she said, kissing my forehead softly. "I brought you some blueberries, the ones you like." I looked at her. I looked at my daughter, the girl I had taught to ride a bike, the woman I had walked down the aisle only 3 years ago. I looked at her and I forced my eyes to go blank. I stripped all recognition from my face. "Thank you," I said politely, taking the bowl. Then I paused. I tilted my head slightly. "Are you the new nurse?" Maya froze. Her hand stopped mid-air. The smile dropped from her face, shattering like glass. "Daddy," she whispered, "it is me. It is Maya, your daughter." I squinted, acting as if I was trying to retrieve a memory through a thick fog. "Maya," I repeated, testing the word. "No. My daughter she is smaller. She has braids. She is at school." Maya covered her mouth, a sob escaping her throat. Tears welled up in her eyes, instant and heavy. "Oh my God," she choked out. "You do not know who I am." From the doorway, I saw Preston. He was leaning against the frame, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold. He did not look sad. He did not look concerned. He looked triumphant. He looked like a general watching the enemy line collapse. "It is okay, babe," Preston said, walking over and wrapping a fake, comforting arm around Maya's shoulders. "I told you this was happening. It is the dementia. It is progressing fast. He is living in the past." Maya buried her face in Preston's chest, sobbing uncontrollably. My heart broke. I wanted to grab her, tell her it was a lie, tell her I was sharp as a tack, but I couldn't. If I broke character now, I would lose everything. And if I lost everything, I could not save her from the ruin Preston was bringing down on us. I just sat there eating a blueberry, acting oblivious to my daughter. Pain. Later that night, I walked past the dining room. Richard, Sylvia, and Preston were drinking again, celebrating the victory of my decline. They were speaking in French freely now, convinced that the vegetable walking in the hallway could not understand a word. Ça y est, il perd la tête, Preston said, swirling his cognac. It is done. He is losing his mind. Did you see him with Maya? He thought she was a nurse. It was perfect. Heartbreaking but perfect. C'est fantastique, Sylvia replied, lighting a thin cigarette inside my house, ignoring my rules. This makes the guardianship hearing a formality. The judge will take one look at the gas incident and the memory loss and hand us the keys. We need to start looking at contractors, Richard. I want to tear down that hideous wall in the kitchen. Wait, Richard interrupted, his voice slurred. Wait until we have the power of attorney. Once we have control of his accounts, we can pay off the immediate concerns. Then we renovate. They clinked glasses. I walked past them, shuffling my feet, mumbling to myself about the weather. They did not even look up. I was no longer a threat. I was just a walking ATM machine waiting to be dispensed. The next morning, I waited until they were all occupied. Preston was on a Zoom call, lying to a client. Richard and Sylvia were sleeping in till noon. I put on my old coat, the one with the frayed collar, and walked out the back door. I am going for a walk, I mumbled to no one in particular. Preston. Voice floated from the study. Yeah. Do not get lost, Pops. Or, actually do. It might save us some paperwork. I walked 3 blocks to the bus stop, checking behind me to ensure I wasn't being followed. I took the number 12 bus across town to a neighborhood Preston would never set foot in. It was a working-class district smelling of diesel and frying grease. I walked into Joe Diner, a place where the coffee tasted like battery acid and the waitress called everyone honey. In the back booth, a man was waiting for me. Saul was 75 but looked 60. He still had the posture of the linebacker he used to be in college. He was wearing a rumpled suit and reading a racing form. When he saw me, he didn't smile. He just slid a thick manila envelope across the Formica table. You look like hell. Otis? Saul grunted, taking a sip of his coffee. I feel like hell, I replied, sliding into the booth. My own daughter thinks I do not know her name. Saul, it is killing me. It will be over soon, Saul said, tapping the envelope. This is the ammo you asked for. And let me tell you, Otis, it is nuclear. I opened the envelope. Inside was a forensic accounting report detailing the financial lives of Richard and Sylvia Miller. I started reading and my eyebrows shot up. I knew they were bad off, Saul, I said, keeping my voice low. I knew they were broke. But this is a catastrophe. It is a house of cards built on a swamp inside a sinkhole, Saul said, grabbing a fry from his plate. Richard has not had a solvent business in 10 years. He has been running a Ponzi scheme, borrowing from new investors to pay off old ones. But the music stopped 6 months ago. The SEC is sniffing around. That is why they are here. Otis, they are not visiting, they are hiding. I flipped the page, looking at the credit reports, scores in the low 400s, maxed out credit cards totaling $200,000, a foreclosure notice on their Hamptons home dated 3 weeks ago, and look at the last page. Saul pointed a thick finger at a document stamped with a red seal. I looked. It was a warrant, a bench warrant issued in the state of Florida for Sylvia Miller. Check fraud. She wrote bad checks to a luxury boutique, Saul explained, trying to keep up appearances, almost 50 grand worth. When the boutique pressed charges, she skipped town. I sat back in the booth feeling the weight of the revelation. This wasn't just about my house. This wasn't just about greed or a nursery for a non-existent baby. This was survival. They are desperate, I whispered. They need my assets to pay off the investors and the lawyers to stay out of prison. That is why they are pushing the guardianship so fast. They need access to my liquidity immediately. Exactly, Saul said, leaning in. If they get guardianship, they can liquidate your portfolio ostensibly to pay for your care at the nursing home. But in reality, they will siphon that money into offshore accounts or shell companies to pay their own debts. They are going to bleed you dry, Otis, and leave you to rot in a state facility. I looked at the photos of Richard and Sylvia in the file. They looked so elegant, so refined in their designer clothes, but they were nothing but common grifters, scavengers picking at the bones of the honest. And Preston, I asked, does he know? He knows everything? Saul said, He is complicit. He owes money to loan sharks in. The city guys who do not sue you. They break your kneecaps. That $145,000 debt you saw, that is just the tip of the iceberg. He promised his creditors a big payout once he secures your estate. He sold you to them. Otis, he sold your life to save his own skin. I closed the folder. My hand was trembling again, but this time it was not from acting. It was from a cold, hard fury. They think I am a senile old man, I said, my voice dropping to a growl. They think I am a resource, a piggy bank. They are about to find out you are a vault rigged with dynamite. Saul grinned, revealing a gold tooth. So what is the play, Otis? The hearing is on Monday. Do we file the injunction now? No, I said, standing up and tucking the envelope inside my coat. If we file now, they will run. They will scatter like roaches, and we might never get the money back for Maya or see them punished properly. I want them all in one room. I want them to think they have won. I want to see the moment the trap snaps. Shut Monday. I said Monday morning at the house. They are bringing their lawyer. I will be there, Saul promised. I will bring the cavalry. I walked out of the diner and into the bright sunlight. The city was noisy alive, but all I could hear was the ticking of a clock. I went back to the house, back to the enemy lines. I walked in through the back door, shuffling my feet, letting my mouth hang open again. Preston was in the kitchen, popping a bottle of champagne. "Hey, Pops," he cheered, raising a glass, celebrating a victory he hadn't won yet. "You made it back. Good news. The lawyer is coming Monday morning just to sign some papers. We are going to get you all taken care of." I looked at him. I looked at the bubbles in his glass. That is nice, Preston, I mumbled, staring at his shoes. "I like papers." Preston laughed, turning to his mother, who was applying lipstick in the hallway reflection. "He likes papers," Preston mocked in French. "Il est complètement parti." He is completely gone. I shuffled past them, clutching the envelope against my ribs beneath my coat. Enjoy the champagne, I thought, because it is the last drink you will ever taste as a free man. Saturday night arrived like a fever dream. The house, my house, the sanctuary I had built with 40 years of sweat and smart investments, had been transformed into a stage set for a con artist. Preston had hired a catering crew, but he fired them at the last minute, claiming they were too expensive. In reality, his credit card had probably been declined again, so that left me. At 5:00, Preston marched into my bedroom, holding a hanger draped in plastic. He threw it on my bed. "Put this on, Pops," he said, chewing on a toothpick. He looked frantic, his eyes darting around the room, checking for dust like a drill sergeant from hell. "Tonight is big, massive investors from the city are coming. People with deep pockets. I need everything to look perfect. That includes you." I unzipped the bag. Inside was a white waiter jacket with gold buttons and a black bow tie. It was a costume, a caricature. It was the kind of thing you see in movies from the 1930s, the uniform of the invisible servant. I stared at the jacket. My hands, which had held rifles, steering wheels, and deeds to skyscrapers, clenched into fists. "You want me to wear a uniform?" "Preston?" I asked, my voice low, dangerously low. Preston rolled his eyes. "Don't start with the pride thing. Okay, it is just for tonight. I told everyone. I told them you help around the house. It makes the narrative better. You know, old family retainer, generational loyalty. It adds class. Just put the jacket on and hand out the Orsti Hoovers. If you pull this off without embarrassing me, maybe I will forget about that gas stove incident when we talk to the judge on Monday." He walked out, leaving the door open. I stood there for a long time looking at myself in the mirror, wearing that white jacket. It was tight across the shoulders, humiliating, degrading. But then I remembered the mission. I remembered Saul words, give them enough rope to hang themselves. If he wanted a servant, I would give him a servant, because the servant is the one person nobody notices. The servant hears everything. The servant sees where the bodies are buried. By 7:00, the living room was full of people who looked like they were made of plastic. The women wore dresses that were too tight, and the men wore suits that were too shiny. They were the B-list of the business world, the kind of people who talk loud to cover up the fact that they have nothing to say. Preston was in his element. He was gliding through the room, holding a glass of my scotch, laughing too hard at jokes that were not funny. I walked through the crowd, holding a silver tray of canapés. I kept my head down, playing the part. Preston clapped his hands, calling for attention. Everyone, everyone listen up, he shouted, standing by the fireplace right in front of my medals, which he had covered with a velvet cloth to hide the evidence of my existence. Welcome to Miller Creative Headquarters. As you can see, we value tradition here, we value legacy. He gestured vaguely at the room, at the mahogany paneling, at the crystal chandelier. And to help us celebrate tonight, we have Luther. Preston pointed at me. I froze mid-step, holding the tray. Luther has been with the family for, forever, right, Luther? He practically came with the house. He is a bit slow these days, but he makes a mean cocktail. The guests chuckled. A ripple of polite, condescending laughter went through the room. I felt a burning sensation on the back of my neck. It was not shame. It was the heat of a target lock. I looked at Maya. She was standing in the corner, holding a glass of wine with both hands. She looked pale, sick. She saw me. She saw the jacket. She saw the humiliation, and she looked down at the floor. She did not speak. She did not defend me. She was broken. I nodded slowly, performing the role. "Yes, sir," I mumbled, avoiding eye contact. "Just here to serve." Preston beamed, turning back to his guests. "See loyalty. That is what Miller Creative is all about. Now drink up. The night is young and the opportunities are endless." I circulated the room, offering food and listening. These people were not investors. They were Mark's prey. Preston was pitching them a stake in a digital marketing algorithm that I knew for a fact did not exist. He was selling them air, and they were buying it drunk on the illusion of wealth that my house provided. Then the doorbell rang. The room went quiet. Preston straightened his tie, looking suddenly nervous. He rushed to the door, wiping his palms on his pants. "This is him," he whispered to Sylvia, who was already drunk on the sofa. "Act normal. This is the whale." Preston opened the door, and a man stepped in. He was different from the others. He was older, perhaps my age, maybe a few years younger. He wore a suit that was not shiny. It was navy blue, perfectly tailored, muted, expensive, in the way that whispers instead of shouts. He had silver hair and eyes that scanned the room with the precision of a hawk. "Monsieur Dubois," Preston shouted, throwing his arms wide, overly enthusiastic. "Welcome, welcome. Entrez, s'il vous plaît," Preston. French was atrocious. His accent was flat. His vowels were all wrong. He sounded like a high school student failing a beginner class. The man, Monsieur Dubois, stepped inside. He did not smile. He looked at Preston, then at the loud crowd, then at the cheap decorations Preston had put up. "Monsieur Miller," Dubois said, his voice deep and heavily accented, calm and authoritative. "Thank you for the invitation. Your office is quite domestic." Preston laughed, nervously sweating. Yes. Well, we believe in a boutique environment. Work from home is the future, right? Please come in. Let me get you a drink. Un verre de vin rouge." "Oui," Preston butchered the words. He pronounced vin like van and rouge like rogue. It was painful to hear. Dubois nodded stiffly. "That would be fine." Preston snapped his fingers at me, not even looking. Luther wine, for Monsieur Dubois. The good bottle from the cellar. The 1996 Chop Chop. I walked to the kitchen, feeling Dubois' eyes on me. I could feel his gaze drilling into my back, assessing, analyzing. He was not like the others. He was not a fool. I went to the pantry where I had hidden the real wine. Knowing Preston would try to raid it, I pulled out a bottle of Chateau Margaux, 1996. It was worth $1,000. Easy. Preston probably thought it was just grape juice. I uncorked it, letting it breathe for a moment, checking the aroma. It was perfect notes of blackcurrant and earth. A waste on Preston, but a necessary sacrifice for the play. When I returned to the living room, Preston had cornered Dubois by the window. He was showing him a graph on an iPad, talking a mile a minute. "So you see, Monsieur Dubois, with your capital injection of $200,000, we can scale the operation globally. We can target the European market. Hence why I am brushing up on my French." Dubois looked bored. He looked like a man who was regretting his decision to come. He held up his hand, stopping Preston. "Flow of words," Monsieur Miller Dubois said, cutting him off. "Your projections are aggressive. But I am curious about the liquidity. You mentioned you own the property outright." "Oh, absolutely." Preston lied without blinking. "This estate has been in the family for generations. Zero debt. It is the collateral for the entire operation. Solid as a rock. I poured the wine into Dubois' glass. My hand was steady. I filled it to the perfect level. Not too much, not too little. Dubois took the glass. He looked at the color, then swirled it gently. He took a sip, and his eyebrows lifted slightly. He looked surprised. Margot. 96, he murmured softy. Excellence. I did not expect this quality. Preston laughed loud and jarring. Oh, only the best for our partners. We have cases of it downstairs. Just old stuff collecting dust, really. Cases. He wished I had 2 bottles. This was the last one. Preston's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and frowned. Excuse me. Monsieur Dubois, I have to take this. It is Tokyo. Always working, right? Luther, keep Monsieur Dubois happy. Refill his glass if he needs. Preston patted me on the shoulder, hard, patronizingly, then walked away toward the kitchen, leaving me alone with the Frenchman. The circle of privacy opened up around us. The other guests were too busy eating the shrimp puffs to notice the servant and the foreigner. Dubois took another sip of wine, watching Preston retreat. Then he turned to me. He did not look at my jacket. He looked at my face. He looked tired. He looked like a man who was surrounded by idiots and just wanted to go home. Excuse me, he said to me in English, his tone polite but distant. Could you point me to the restroom? The noise in here is quite overwhelming. I looked around. No one was watching. Preston was arguing on the phone in the kitchen. Sylvia was passed out in the armchair. Maya was hiding on the balcony. I stood up straighter. I dropped the stoop in my shoulders. I looked Monsieur Dubois directly in the eye. And then I spoke. But I did not speak in the broken, mumbling English of Luther the servant. I spoke in the language of the city where I had learned to love, where I had learned to fight, and where I had made my first million au fond du couloir à droite, monsieur. I said, my voice low, resonant, perfect. The vowels were rounded. The R was guttural and soft, exactly as it should be spoken in the 16th arrondissement. La porte en chêne, pas celle en plastique. Translation, down the hall to the right, sir. The oak door, not the plastic one. Dubois froze. His glass stopped halfway to his mouth. He stared at me. His eyes went wide, scanning my face, searching for the trick. He blinked once, twice. Then he leaned in closer, dropping his voice to a whisper, switching immediately to rapid fire. French, vous parlez français. And not just French. You have a Parisian accent. A local accent. I allowed a small ghost of a smile to touch my lips. I kept my posture rigid, holding the silver tray like a shield. J'y ai vécu 15 ans, monsieur, I replied softly. I lived there for 15 years, sur Rue de Rivoli. Before the war, and after logistics and real estate. Dubois looked at the waiter jacket, then back at my eyes. He looked at the rowdy crowd of fake investors, then at the arrogant son-in-law shouting in the kitchen. The pieces of the puzzle clicked together in his mind behind those sharp, intelligent eyes. He saw the deception. He saw the man standing in the ruins of his own dignity. Logistics, Dubois whispered, looking at the wine glass Preston had said was dust and real estate. So, this house, the collateral. C'est à moi, I whispered. It is mine. Tout est à moi. Everything is mine. And the man in the kitchen. He is a thief without a penny. Dubois' lips curved slowly into a smile. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf recognizing another wolf in the snow. He took a slow, deliberate sip of the Margot, saluting me with the glass. I see, he said in English, his voice smooth as silk. I see everything now. Just then, Preston burst back into the room, shoving his phone into his pocket, beaming. Sorry about that. Monsieur Dubois, global markets never sleep, am I right? So are we ready to talk about that check? Dubois looked at Preston, then he looked at me, the servant, the help, the old monkey. He looked back at Preston and his smile widened, showing teeth. Actually, Monsieur Miller, Dubois said, I would like to hear more about the history of the house. It seems fascinating. I caught Dubois' eye. I raised a single finger to my lips in a universal gesture of silence. Shh. Dubois nodded imperceptibly. The trap was set. and now I had a partner inside the cage. Monday morning smelled like antiseptic and betrayal. Preston drove us to the appointment in his Mercedes, speeding through the city with the nervous energy of a getaway driver. Maya sat in the passenger seat, clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. I sat in the back watching the city roll by, acting the part of the confused geriatric passenger. We were not going to the Veterans Affairs Hospital where my medical records had been kept since 1975. We were not going to the University Medical Center, where the doctors actually had board certifications that meant something. No, Preston was taking me to a strip mall clinic nestled between a payday loan shop and a vape store. Dr. Eris Thorne, Private Practice. The sign on the glass door was peeling slightly at the corners inside. The waiting room smelled of stale coffee and desperation. The carpet was a shade of brown that was designed to hide stains, and the magazines on the table were 3 years old. Preston marched up to the receptionist, a woman who looked like she would rather be anywhere else on earth. "We have an appointment for Luther King," Preston said, tapping his fingers on the counter. "VIP consultation. I spoke with Dr. Thorne personally." The receptionist popped her gum and pointed down the hall. "Room 3. He is expecting you." I shuffled behind them, letting my feet drag slightly on the carpet. I looked at Maya. She was trembling. She looked back at me with tears in her eyes, guilt eating her alive from the inside out. "It is just a checkup, Daddy," she whispered, squeezing my hand. "It is just to make sure you are okay." I squeezed her hand back gently. "I am okay, sweetie," I said in my old man voice. "I am just a little tired." Room 3 was small and claustrophobic. The walls were thin. I could hear someone coughing in the next room. Dr. Thorne was waiting for us. He was a short man with a sweaty upper lip and a suit that was too tight across the midsection. He did not look like a healer. He looked like a used car salesman who had found a stethoscope. "Ah, Mr. King," Thorne said, extending a clammy hand. "Please, sit up here on the exam table." I climbed up, moving slowly, making a show of my stiff joints. Preston stood by the door, arms crossed, acting like a prison guard. Maya sat in the corner chair, looking at the floor. "So, Luther." Thorne began opening a file folder that I noticed was completely empty, except for a single sheet of paper. "Preston tells me you have been experiencing some memory lapses, confusion. Is that correct?" I looked at Thorne. I looked at his eyes. They were shifting, darting around the room, avoiding direct contact. He was nervous. He knew what he was doing was illegal. He just did not know who he was doing it to. I do not know," I stammered, staring at the blood pressure cuff on the wall. Sometimes I forget where I put my keys." Thorne nodded, scribbling furiously on his empty notepad. "Keys typical. And the gas stove incident Preston mentioned. You left the gas on." I looked at Preston. He was staring at me, daring me to deny it. "I wanted to make tea," I mumbled. "I like tea." Thorne made a tisk sound, shaking his head. Disorientation, loss of executive function, inability to operate simple household appliances safely. "Tell me, Luther, what year is it?" I paused. This was the big question, the question that would seal my fate on paper. I decided to give them exactly what they paid for. "It is..." I squinted as if trying to see through a fog. "It is 1972. Nixon is president, right?" Maya let out a small sob, covering her mouth. Thorne scribbled again, looking grave. 1972. "I see. And do you know who this is?" He pointed to Maya. I looked at my daughter. I saw the pain in her face. I hated myself for doing this to her, but I had to push her. I had to push her until she either broke or woke up. That is the nurse," I said softly. "She is a nice nurse." Maya burst into tears, burying her face in her hands. "Oh God, Daddy." Thorne closed the folder with a snap, looking at Preston, then at Maya. "Well, the clinical presentation is quite clear, I am afraid, based on my examination and the history provided by Mr. Miller. I am diagnosing Mr. King with rapid onset dementia, likely Alzheimer type, moderate to severe stage. He is experiencing significant cognitive decline, temporal displacement, and is a danger to himself and others." Maya looked up, her face streaked with mascara. But doctor, are you sure? It happened so fast? Just last month he was fine. He was reading the newspaper." Thorne sighed. putting on a fake, sympathetic face. It can happen like that. The brain is a fragile thing. Stress can trigger a cascade failure. In my professional opinion, he requires 24-hour supervision. He cannot live alone, and frankly, he cannot live in a home environment that is not secured. Preston stepped forward, putting a hand on Maya's shoulder. See, babe, that is what I told you. Dr. Thorne is the best. He knows what he is talking about. We cannot keep him at the house. It is negligent. Maya shook her head, crying harder. No, Preston. I cannot send him away. He is my dad. Maybe we can hire a nurse. Maybe we can. Preston's grip on her shoulder tightened. I saw his fingers dig into her sweater. A nurse, Preston snapped, cutting her off. A nurse costs $5,000 a month. Maya, do we have $5,000 a month? No, we do not. And what if the nurse falls asleep? What if he goes into the kitchen at 3 a.m. and turns on the gas again? Do you want to wake up in flames, Maya? Do you want him to burn the house down with us inside? Maya flinched, shrinking away from him, but the nursing home. Sunset Pines is safe, Preston hissed, leaning into her face. It is the only option. Stop being selfish, Maya. You are risking everyone's lives because you cannot let go. He does not even know who you are. Look at him. He thinks you are the help. I sat on the table staring blankly ahead, hiding the rage that was boiling in my blood. He was using my performance to crush her spirit. Preston turned to Thorne. Doctor, could you give us a minute? I need to calm my wife down before we handle the paperwork. Of course, Thorne said, wiping his forehead. I will just step out to the reception. Wait, Preston said. Actually, Luther, why do not you go sit in the waiting room, watch the TV? They have cartoons on. Go on, Pops. He wanted me out of the room. He wanted to be alone with the doctor. I hopped down from the table. I moved slowly, shuffling toward the door. But as I passed the metal filing cabinet in the corner, the one obscured by a fake potted plant, I stumbled. Whoops, I muttered, bracing myself against the cabinet. Careful, Pops, Preston barked. In that split second of stumbling, my hand moved with the precision of a master sergeant. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a device no larger than a quarter. It was a magnetic wide-angle camera with a battery life of 4 hours and a direct upload link to a cloud server. I slapped it onto the side of the filing cabinet, tucking it behind a broad leaf of the plastic fern. It was invisible unless you were looking for it. And these two amateurs were definitely not looking. I steadied myself. I am okay, I mumbled. I am going. I walked out of the room and closed the door behind me. I sat in the waiting room staring at a muted television screen showing a cooking show. But my mind was not on the screen. My hand was in my pocket, clutching my phone. I opened the app linked to the camera. I put one earbud in, hiding the wire under my collar. The video feed flickered to life on my screen, crystal clear. Inside the room, Preston had stopped comforting Maya. He had practically shoved her out the door a few seconds after me, telling her to go wash her face in the bathroom. Now it was just Preston and Dr. Thorne. The audio came through crisp and sharp. Is she gone? Thorne asked, his voice dropping the professional facade. Yeah, she is in the bathroom, Preston said, walking over to the exam table and leaning back, arrogance radiating off him. She will sign the papers. She does whatever I tell her eventually. So, Doc, the diagnosis is solid, right? It will hold up in court on Monday. Thorne chuckled, a greasy, nasty sound. It is bulletproof. My report states he is completely incompetent, unaware of time and space. The judge will grant emergency guardianship immediately. You will have control of his assets by Tuesday afternoon. Perfect, Preston grinned. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick, white envelope. It was bulky. Here is the other half, as agreed, Preston said, tossing the envelope onto the doctor's desk. Thorne grabbed it greedily. He didn't even try to hide it. He opened the flap and thumbed through the bills. 5,000. Thorne counted, nodding, satisfied. A pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Miller. If you need anything else, maybe some heavy sedatives to keep him quiet at the nursing home, just let me know. Sedatives? Preston laughed. Yeah, that might be good. Keep him drooling in the corner, easier to manage. I watched the screen, my heart pounding with a mixture of hatred and triumph. I had them. I had the bribe. I had the fake diagnosis. I had the conspiracy to defraud the court. And I had Preston admitting he wanted to drug me into submission. I tapped the screen, pressing the button that said Upload to Secure Server. A little progress bar appeared. Uploading. 20%, 50%, 100%. Sent 2 miles away in a basement office that smelled of old cigars and Justice Saul phone pinged. I sat back in the chair, taking the earbud out just as Maya came out of the bathroom. Her face was washed, but her eyes were still red. Preston came out of the room a moment later, clapping Dr. Thorne on the back. "Great news, babe," Preston said, smiling like a shark. "Dr. Thorne says he can fast-track the admission to Sunset Pines. We can get him settled tomorrow." Maya looked at me, then at Preston. She looked defeated, broken. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, Preston. If you think it is best." I stood up, shuffling over to them. "Ready to go?" I asked innocently. Preston patted my head like I was a dog. "Yeah. Pops, we are ready. Let us go get some ice cream." "You like ice cream, right?" I smiled, a big toothy grin. "I love ice cream, Preston," I said. "And I love surprises." He did not know that the biggest surprise of his life was currently sitting on a server waiting for Monday morning. We walked out to the car. The sun was shining, but for Preston Miller, the storm was already gathering just over the horizon, and he had no umbrella. Siege warfare is a concept most people only see in movies involving castles and knights. But in the logistics corps, we learned that a siege is not about arrows or battering rams. It is about resources. You cut the water, you cut the supply lines, and you wait for the enemy to turn on each other inside the walls. My house was the fortress, and Preston Miller was the occupying force, but he had made a critical mistake. He assumed the fortress was running on autopilot. He assumed the electricity, the heat, and the invisible magic of the internet were natural rights granted to him by the universe. He forgot that every single comfort in that house had a bill attached to it, and every bill had my name on it. Wednesday marked the beginning of the deprivation phase. I woke up at 4 in the morning while the house was silent and the invaders were deep in their alcohol-induced comas. I went down to the basement where the main breaker box was located. I did not cut the power entirely. That would be too obvious and might trigger a welfare check from the neighbors. Instead, I located the specific breaker for the hot water heater. I flipped it to the off position, listening to the hum of the tank die down into silence. Step 1 complete. Then I went to the utility closet in the hallway where the high-speed fiber optic router was blinking its frantic green lights. Preston loved this router. He had demanded I upgrade to the fastest business package available, claiming he needed gigabit speeds for his massive file transfers. In reality, I knew he needed it because the video games he played required zero latency. I reached out and simply pulled the power cord from the back. I did not just unplug it. I took the cord with me, wrapping it into a neat coil and shoving it into the pocket of my bathrobe. Then I went to the kitchen, made my coffee on the gas stove I had forgotten to turn off previously, and waited for the chaos. It started at 8:30. I heard a door slam upstairs, followed by the heavy thumping of footsteps running down the hallway. It sounded like a panicked elephant. "Pops!" Preston screamed from the top of the stairs. "Pops, the Wi-Fi is down. The network is gone. I cannot see the SSID. I sat at the kitchen table, slowly tearing a piece of toast into tiny shreds, staring at them with a vacant expression. Preston burst into the kitchen. He was wearing his boxers and a t-shirt, his hair wild, his eyes bloodshot. He held his phone up, shaking it like a talisman that had lost its magic. "The internet!" Preston yelled, slamming his hand on the table, frightening Maya, who had just walked in to get water. "The router is dead. What did you do? Did you touch it?" I looked up at him, blinking slowly. What?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "The internet. The Wi-Fi." Preston groaned, dragging his hands down his face. "God, why is this happening today? I have a conference call with the Tokyo investors in 10 minutes. Pop's millions are on the line." "Did you pay the bill? The bill from Comcast?" I furrowed my brow, acting as if I was trying to solve a complex calculus equation in my head. "The bill," I repeated, testing the word carefully. "Oh, the blue paper." "Yes, the blue paper," Preston snapped. "Did you pay it?" I looked down at my toast, ashamed. I think I put it in the recycling. I thought it was junk mail. It comes so often, Preston." "I am sorry." Preston let out a scream of pure frustration, kicking the leg of the table. He spun around, pacing the kitchen floor like a caged animal. He threw it away. He threw the bill away. Preston shouted at Maya, "Do you hear this?" He cut us off. "I cannot work. I cannot trade. This is a disaster. I am going to lose the contract." I watched him pace, hiding my satisfaction. The truth was, there was no contract. I had installed a packet sniffer on the network the day he moved in. I saw his traffic. He wasn't trading stocks or designing ad campaigns. He was spending 6 hours a day on World of Warcraft, and the other 4 hours in private chat rooms with names that would make a sailor blush. He wasn't losing millions. He was losing his ranking on a server full of teenagers. Preston pulled out his phone, furiously tapping the screen. "I have to tether. I have to use my data. Plan B, he muttered to himself, running out of the room to try and find a signal in my brick house, which was notoriously bad for cellular reception. Phase 1 was a success. The enemy was agitated, communication was disrupted. Phase 2 hit them an hour later. I heard the shower turn on upstairs. It was Preston again, trying to wash away the stress of his disconnected morning. I waited, counting the seconds in my head. 1, 2, 3. A blood-curdling shriek echoed through the vents. It was a high-pitched scream, the sound of a man who had never experienced a cold shower in his life. I sipped my coffee, calm and serene. Moments later, Preston came stomping down the stairs again, this time wrapped in a towel, shivering violently, his lips actually turning a shade of blue. Water dripped from his hair onto my hardwood floors. "There is no hot water." He chattered, his teeth clicking together. "It is freezing. It is like ice water coming out of the pipes. What is wrong with this house?" He looked at me accusingly. I looked back, innocent as a lamb. "I do not know, Preston," I said softly. "Maybe the tank is broken." "It is an old house." "Broken," Preston yelled. "Everything is broken. The internet is broken. The water is broken. Your brain is broken." He was losing control. The facade of the cool businessman was cracking, revealing the spoiled brat underneath. "Did you pay the gas bill, Pops? Or did you throw that in the recycling too?" I lowered my head, acting scolded. I might have forgotten." I whispered. "I forget things, Preston. You know I forget." Preston looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. He was cold. He was disconnected from his digital addiction, and he was facing the reality of his own helplessness. He stepped closer to me, invading my personal space, towering over me while I sat in the chair. He smelled of wet dog and expensive soap. He leaned down, his face inches from mine. "You are doing this on purpose, aren't you?" he hissed. But then he pulled back, shaking his head. "No, that would require a brain. You are just empty." He turned to leave, but stopped, looking at his mother, Sylvia, who was sitting on the sofa nursing a hangover. He switched to French, spitting the words out like venom. "Vieux débris. Inutile. Je devrais t'étouffer dans ton sommeil. Old useless debris. I should smother you in your sleep." The room went silent. The air seemed to freeze. Not because of the drafty windows, but because of the words he had just spoken. It was a death threat. It was a wish for my end spoken in the language he thought kept him safe. Something inside me snapped. Not the snap of a broken twig, but the release of a safety catch on a weapon. I stopped acting. I stopped trembling. I stopped blinking my eyes in that confused, vacuous rhythm. I sat up straighter in the chair. My shoulders, which had been slumped in a posture of defeat, squared themselves instinctively. I lifted my head and locked eyes with him. I did not look at his nose or his forehead. I looked straight into his pupils. I channeled every ounce of authority I had possessed as a master sergeant, every ounce of cold calculation that had allowed me to survive 15 years in the cutthroat Paris real estate market. I looked at him the way a predator looks at prey that has just made a fatal error. 1 second. Preston's eyes widened slightly. He saw the shift. He saw the fog clear from my gaze. 2 seconds. I let him see the intelligence burning behind the iris. I let him see the memory of violence. I let him see that the old man in the chair was capable of things his soft generation could not even imagine. I drilled into his soul, silently communicating a message. "Try it, boy. Try to smother me and see who wakes up." 3 seconds. Preston flinched. He physically recoiled, stepping back as if I had slapped him. A shiver ran through his body that had nothing to do with the cold water. He blinked rapidly, confused, terrified. He looked at Maya, then back at me. But by the time he looked back, I was gone. The soldier had retreated back into the bunker. I blinked rapidly, my mouth falling open again. What? What did you say? Preston, I asked, my voice quavering again. Did you say something about sleep? I like to sleep. Preston stared at me, breathing hard. He ran a hand through his wet hair, shaking his head as if trying to clear a hallucination. Nothing, he muttered, his voice shaking. Just get the bills paid, old man, or I will put you in a home tonight. I swear to God. He turned and fled up the stairs, but he didn't run with the arrogance he usually had. He ran like someone who had just seen a ghost in the machine. I watched him go. I listened to the door slam. Maya looked at me, concern etched on her face. Daddy, are you okay? She asked softly. Preston is just stressed. He didn't mean to yell. I looked at my daughter, the woman who was defending a monster. He is cold. Maya, I said simply. Cold makes people angry. I picked up my toast again. But inside, I was smiling. He had felt it. He had felt the power shift, even if he couldn't explain it. He knew deep down in his lizard brain that something was wrong with the narrative. He called me useless debris, but debris is what remains after an explosion. And he had no idea that he was standing right on top of the bomb, and I had just lit the fuse. I finished my breakfast. The cold water and the lack of internet were just the softening up. Artillery barrage. The real ground assault was coming on Monday, and I needed to be ready. I reached into my pocket and touched the power cord for the router. Let them sit in the silence. Let them sit in the cold. It gives them more time to think about their sins. Thursday brought a silence to the house that was heavier than the noise of the previous days. It was the silence of a tomb. The cold water and the lack of internet had driven Preston out of the house early. He had stormed out, claiming he was going to a cafe to work. But I knew he was going to the track, or to an underground poker game to try and win back the money he owed. The sharks were circling and he was bleeding. That left me alone with Maya. I spent the morning in the garden pruning my roses, acting the part of the oblivious retiree. But my eyes were sharp, watching the window of the master bedroom. My bedroom, the room Preston and Maya had commandeered. Around 11 o'clock, I saw movement inside. The curtains shifted. I saw Maya pacing back and forth. She was holding something tight to her chest. I went inside, moving quietly on the balls of my feet. I stood at the bottom of the stairs and listened. I am trying. Preston, I heard Maya whisper, her voice cracking with desperation. I am looking everywhere, but he does not keep cash in the house anymore. I checked his drawers. I checked the mattress. She was looting me. She was searching my room for money to give to him. I felt a cold stone settle in my stomach. It was not anger. It was a profound sorrow, deeper than the ocean. My daughter, the girl who used to cry if she accidentally stepped on a snail, was now robbing her own father to feed the addiction of a narcissist. There is nothing here, she sobbed into the phone. Wait. Preston, I think I found the box. The blue velvet one under the floorboard in the closet. My breath hitched. The blue velvet box. It contained the only thing of real value I kept in the house, aside from my secret files. It was my late wife's sapphire ring, a ring I had bought in 1968 with my combat pay from Vietnam. It was not just jewelry. It was the promise I made to her that we would survive, that we would build a life. It was the ring Maya was supposed to inherit on her 40th birthday. Take it. Preston, voice on the speakerphone, was faint, but I heard the greed dripping from it. Take it to the shop on 4th Street, the one with the neon sign. They do not ask questions. Get whatever you can. Maya, I need $5,000 by noon, or they are going to break my fingers. Do you want me hurt? No. I am going. Now. I love you, Preston. Please be safe. I heard her footsteps running across the floorboards. I retreated quickly, slipping into the kitchen and sitting at the table, pretending to read a 3-day-old newspaper. Maya came rushing down the stairs, clutching her purse to her chest. She looked pale, sickly. She did not look at me. She ran past the kitchen, heading for the front door. Maya, I called out softly. She froze, her hand on the doorknob. She turned slowly, terror in her eyes. Yes, Daddy. Where are you going in such a hurry? I asked, keeping my voice mild, confused. I have to run an errand. To the pharmacy for your medicine. My medicine. I had plenty of medicine. She was lying to my face, stealing her mother legacy to save a man who called her father a useless monkey. Okay, sweetie, I said, looking down at the paper. Drive safe. She fled. The door slammed behind her. I waited 10 seconds. Then I stood up. I did not follow her. I did not need to. I knew exactly where she was going. The pawn shop on 4th Street was a fence operation. I knew the owner. I knew the rates. He would give her $500 for a ring worth $5,000, and Preston would lose that $500 in a single hand of blackjack. I walked into the living room and looked at the photo of my wife on the mantelpiece. I am sorry, Eleanor, I whispered. I cannot save the ring, but I have to save the girl. And to save the girl, I have to break her heart. I went to my room and put on my coat. Not the shabby one I wore around Preston, but a clean trench coat that commanded a little more respect. I walked out the back door and took a taxi to the financial district. I walked into the marble lobby of the First City Bank. This was not the branch where I kept my checking account. This was the headquarters where the high net worth trust funds were managed. The security guard looked at me suspiciously, ready to ask me to leave. But I walked straight to the elevator bank and inserted a black card into the slot. The light turned green. The doors opened. I rode up to the 45th floor. When the doors opened, the noise of the city was gone, replaced by the hushed tones of wealth. Mr. Henderson, the senior trust manager, was waiting for me. He was a man who knew where the bodies were buried because he had helped dig the holes, Mr. King Henderson said, shaking my hand firmly. You look intense today. I need to make a change. Henderson, I said, walking past him into his corner office. I did not sit down. I stood by the window, looking out over the city, looking toward the neighborhood where my daughter was currently selling her soul for peanuts. I need to access the Maya King Irrevocable Trust. Henderson nodded, sitting at his desk and opening a secure file on his computer. The account established in 1990. Current valuation $2.2 million. It is set to vest on her 35th birthday or upon your death, whichever comes first. Freeze it, I said. Henderson stopped typing. He looked up over his glasses. Freeze it, sir. You mean lock the disbursement? I mean kill it, I said, my voice hard. Kill the access. Clause 7A, acting against the interest of the grantor. I want that money locked down so tight that even God himself would need a court order to see a penny of it. Henderson looked worried. Luther, this is a drastic step. That money was for her security. She has no security right now. I snapped. I turned from the window facing him. If she gets that money now, Henderson, if I die tomorrow and that trust vests, Preston Miller will drain it in a month. He will snort it, gamble it, and spend it on whores. And my daughter will be left on the street with nothing. The only way to protect her is to make sure she is penniless. Penniless, Henderson repeated. Yes, if she has money, she is a target. If she is broke, she is useless to him. And if she is useless, he will discard her. And that is the only way she survives. I watched Henderson type the commands. I watched the screen flash red, confirming the lockdown. The Maya King Trust was now a fortress with no doors. I signed the paperwork. My hand did not shake, but my heart did. I was cutting off my own child. I was taking away the safety net I had spent a lifetime weaving, but I knew that a safety net is useless if the person falling is holding a grenade. When I walked out of the bank, the sun was setting, casting long shadows. Across the city, I took a taxi back to the house. When I walked in, the atmosphere had changed again. Preston was home. He was in the living room counting a small stack of dirty bills. 50s, 20s. The money from the ring. He looked up when I entered, a smirk on his face. Hey, Pops. Have a nice walk. I looked at the money. I looked at his hands that had never done a hard day work in their life. I walked past him into the kitchen. Maya was sitting at the table. Her eyes were red puffy. She was staring at her empty hands, her ring finger bare. I poured myself a glass of water. Did you get the medicine, Maya? I asked, my voice soft. She flinched. She looked at me, and for a second I saw the truth in her eyes. She wanted to tell me. She wanted to scream that she had sold Mom ring. She wanted to beg for help, but she didn't. She looked down. Yes, Daddy, she whispered. It is in the cabinet. Liar. I took a sip of water. Good, I said. I am glad you are taking care of things. Maya, because you never know what tomorrow brings. I walked away, leaving her in her misery. She thought she had lost a ring. She didn't know that she had just lost $2 million. And she didn't know that the man sitting in the other room counting his ill-gotten gains was about to find out that the Bank of Luther King was permanently closed. I went to my room and locked the door. I took out my notebook and wrote one line. The asset has been secured. The liability has been isolated. Monday was coming. And when Preston Miller walked into that courtroom thinking he was going to take control of my fortune, he was going to find out that he was trying to rob an empty vault. I lay down on my bed, staring at the ceiling. I could hear Preston laughing downstairs. He had $500 in his pocket. He felt rich. Laugh while you can, son, I thought, because poverty is coming for you, and it is going to be a cold, long winter. Friday night arrived with the scent of pepperoni pizza and high-octane delusion Preston had ordered. 3 large pizzas from the expensive Italian place downtown, celebrating a victory that had not yet happened. The dining room table was covered not with plates and napkins, but with glossy brochures, architectural renderings, and floor plans. The centerpiece of this paper shrine was a sleek artist concept of a skyscraper gleaming in the sunlight. King Tower. I stood in the doorway, leaning on my cane, staring at the image. The building was real. It was the crown jewel of the financial district. 40 stories of steel and blue glass that dominated the skyline. But to me, it was not just a building. It was a memory. I bought that land in 1995, back when it was a derelict textile warehouse surrounded by chain-link fences and broken bottles. Everyone told me I was crazy. The city planners laughed at me. My own banker told me I was throwing away my army pension on a rust bucket. But I saw the zoning maps, I saw the transit lines extending north. I saw the future before the experts did. I tore down the warehouse and partnered with a developer who needed liquidity. We built the tower brick by brick, deal by deal. And though my name is not on the brass plaque in the lobby, my name is on the deed held within a blind trust that Preston Miller could not find even if he had a map and a flashlight. And now, here he was, my son-in-law, pointing at my building with a greasy slice of pizza in his hand. "Look at this beauty, Pops," Preston shouted, his mouth half full. "This is it. This is the new headquarters for Miller Creative Floor, 35, the penthouse suite. The view alone will close deals." He slapped the brochure, confident, arrogant, completely unaware that he was trying to rent space from the very man he was trying to put in a nursing home. Maya sat at the table, looking pale and thin. She was staring at the brochure like it was a monster that was about to eat her. "Preston," she whispered. $35,000 a month. Is that safe?" "Safe?" Preston laughed, wiping tomato sauce from his chin with the back of his hand. "It is not about safety, Maya. It is about projection of power. You have to spend money to make money. The lease requires a deposit, first month, last month, and a security fee. $50,000 due at signing on Monday morning. $50,000. Maya choked on her water. "Preston, we do not have $50,000. You know we do not. The accounts are—" Preston slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. "Stop with the negativity, Maya," he hissed, his eyes narrowing. "This is why you never get ahead. You think small. I have investors lined up. Remember, Monsieur Dubois is practically begging to give me money. But I need the space to impress him. I need the address." He turned his gaze slowly toward me. "And that is where Pops comes in." I stood there blinking slowly, feigning the confusion that had become my armor. "Me?" I asked, pointing a shaking finger at my chest. "I do not have a tower." Preston rolled his eyes, sighing loudly. "No, Pops, you do not have a tower, you have a savings account. A retirement fund that has been sitting there earning dust for 20 years. You are going to loan us the deposit." "Loan," I repeated, testing the word as if it were foreign. "Yes." "An investment," Preston said, standing up and walking over to me. He put his hands on my shoulders, squeezing hard enough to bruise. "Think of it as your legacy, Luther. You are helping build the family empire, and when the company takes off, I will pay you back, double, triple, even. You will be the richest guy at Sunset Pines." He was lying. The lie was so thick I could taste it on the air like stale smoke. He had no intention of paying me back. He intended to drain my account, sign the lease default in 3 months, and leave me destitute while he moved on to his next scam. But I needed him to sign the lease. I needed him to walk into that trap. I have money, I mumbled, looking down at my shoes. I have the checkbook, under the mattress. Preston's eyes lit up, purely predatory. Go get it, Pops. Go get it right now. We write the check tonight. Maya takes it to the bank tomorrow morning and gets a cashier check. We lock this down. I shuffled to my room, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm of war drums. I went to my safe, not the decoy. Safe under the bed, but the real safe hidden behind the baseboard in the closet. I pulled out an old checkbook from a defunct account, an account I kept open with a balance of exactly $51,000 just for emergencies like this. But next to the checkbook, I pulled out another piece of paper. It was a document I had drafted myself using the legal knowledge I had absorbed over decades of commercial litigation. It looked like a standard bank withdrawal authorization form. It had the bank logo at the top, it had lines for signatures, but the fine print, the paragraphs of text in the middle were not standard. Put on my reading glasses and scanned the text one last time. The undersigned borrower acknowledges receipt of $50,000 and agrees that this sum is a personal loan secured by all current and future assets, including but not limited to intellectual property, personal vehicles, and real estate interests. In the event of default defined as failure to repay within 30 days, the lender assumes immediate title to said assets. It was a death warrant for his lifestyle disguised as a receipt. I tucked the document inside the checkbook and walked back to the dining room. Preston was pacing, practically vibrating with greed. Maya was staring at the table, refusing to look at me. Here, I said, my voice trembling perfectly. I placed the checkbook on the table. Preston snatched it up, opening it expecting to see cash. No checks. You have to write it. My hands shake, Preston. I said, I cannot write well. You write it. I will sign. Preston grabbed a pen. He filled out the check furiously, making it out to himself. Preston Miller, $50,000. He shoved the check in front of me. Sign here. Pops, right on the line. I picked up the pen. My hand hovered over the paper. Then I stopped. Wait, I said. What? Preston snapped. What is it? The bank man told me, I said, looking confused. The lady at the bank. She said, I need a receipt. She said, if I give money away, I need a paper. So the tax man does not come. Preston groaned, leaning back, his head hitting the back of the chair. Jesus Christ. Pops, nobody cares about the tax man. It is a family transfer. I pulled the document from under the checkbook, placing it on the table. Please, Preston, I whispered. I am scared of the tax man. The lady said, sign the paper. Just a receipt, saying you got the check. Preston looked at the paper. He saw the logo of the bank. He saw the words, acknowledgement of receipt at the top. He did not read the dense paragraph in the middle. He did not care. He just wanted the check. Fine, he spat, grabbing the pen. Give it to me. He scribbled his signature at the bottom, heavy and aggressive, tearing through the paper slightly. There. Happy. He shoved the paper back at me. Now sign the check. I took the paper. I folded it slowly, carefully, tucking it into my breast pocket, right next to my heart. It felt warm. It felt like justice. Then I signed the check. I signed it with a shaky hand, making the letters crooked. But it was a valid signature. Preston grabbed the check, blowing on the ink. He held it up to the light, smiling like a man who had just conquered the world. King Tower. Here we come, he shouted, kissing the check. Maya, look at this. We are rich. Maya looked up, offering a weak, watery smile. She didn't know that her husband had just signed away everything he owned, including the car he drove and the clothes on his back, to the man he called a vegetable. I stood up, leaning heavily on my cane. I am tired, I said softly. I am going to bed now. Go to bed, Pops, Preston said, dismissing me, not even looking at me. You did good today, real good. I walked down the hallway listening to his celebration. He was going to take that check to the bank tomorrow. He was going to get his cashier check. He was going to walk into the leasing office of King Tower on Monday morning and slap it on the desk. And the leasing agent who was on my payroll was going to smile, take the money, and hand him a lease that had a cancellation clause so strict that if he missed a payment by 1 hour, he would be evicted. But the best part was that by Monday afternoon, when the guardianship hearing began, I would produce the document he had just signed. He thought he was using my money to rent space in my building. He didn't realize that he had just sold himself to the landlord. I closed my bedroom door, and for the first time in weeks I did not lock it. I did not need to. The wolf was no longer at the door. The wolf was in the trap, and he was chewing on his own leg, thinking it was a steak. Sunday night was the longest night of my life. It was the eve of the execution, but the executioners were the ones wearing the blindfolds. The atmosphere in my house was suffocating thick with the smell of roasting meat and the loud braying laughter of people who believe they have already won. Preston and his parents had decided to throw a preemptive victory party. They called it a farewell dinner for me, though they did not say it to my face. They said it was just a Sunday roast to use up the food in the freezer before the big changes. I stood in the kitchen doorway watching them. They had dragged the dining table into the center of the room, extending it to its full length. But what made my breath catch in my throat was not the location of the table, it was what was on it. They had raided the china cabinet. For 30 years that cabinet had remained locked, holding the Limoges porcelain set my wife Eleanor had brought back from France in 1966. It was white with a delicate rim of gold and blue cornflowers. Eleanor had loved those plates. She only used them for Christmas and Thanksgiving, washing them by hand, drying them with a soft cloth, as if they were made of spun sugar. When she died, I locked the cabinet, and I had not opened it since. Now Preston was cutting a steak on one of those plates, his knife screeching against the delicate glaze, leaving gray scratches across the cornflowers. Richard was tapping his heavy cigar ash into a saucer. Sylvia was piling potato salad onto a serving platter meant for delicate pastries. My hands clenched at my sides. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march in there, overturn the table, and throw them out into the street. But I forced my hands to relax. I forced my breathing to slow down. The mission was almost over. I could not break cover now. Not when the enemy was so close to the edge of the cliff. I walked into the room carrying a pitcher of ice water, acting the part of the servant. One last time. More wine, Richard bellowed, lifting his glass without looking at me. He was red-faced, sweating slightly from the heat of the room and the alcohol flowing through his veins. I poured the wine. It was a bottle of Cabernet I had bought for my 50th wedding anniversary, an anniversary I had spent alone at her grave. Now it was fueling the laughter of the people trying to steal her home. "This steak is fantastic," Sylvia said, chewing with her mouth open. "You know, once we remodel the kitchen, we should host a real dinner party. Invite the neighbors. Show them that the neighborhood is gentrifying." Richard laughed, wiping grease from his chin. "Gentrifying. That is one word for it. I call it purifying. We get rid of the old wood and bring in the new steel. Speaking of old wood," he gestured with his fork toward me. I was standing by the sideboard, refilling the water pitcher. "Is he packed?" Richard asked, talking about me as if I were a piece of furniture. Preston nodded, cutting another piece of steak violently. "Yeah, his bag is by the door. Just the essentials," Dr. Thorne said. "We do not want to overwhelm him with personal items. The facility provides clothes, uniforms, mostly. Easier for the staff to manage." Uniforms. They were planning to put me in a state-run facility where the patients wore hospital gowns and sat in hallways, smelling of urine. And they were discussing it while eating off my wife. Wedding china. Maya was sitting at the end of the table. She was not eating. She was staring at her plate, pushing a pea around with her fork. She looked pale, ghostly. She knew this was wrong. She knew using her mother china was a desecration, but she said nothing. She had lost her voice. She had lost her spine. She was just a shell waiting for orders. Then it happened. Sylvia reached across the table for the salt shaker. She was clumsy, her coordination shot from the wine. Her sleeve caught the edge of her wine glass. The heavy crystal goblet tipped over, hitting the edge of her plate. Crash! The sound was sharp and terrible. The plate, Eleanor's favorite dinner plate, the one with the slightly darker blue flower in the center, slid off the table and shattered on the hardwood floor. It did not just break. It exploded into a dozen sharp, jagged pieces of white and gold. The room went silent. I froze. The pitcher of water in my hand trembled slightly. Just for a second. Sylvia looked down at the mess. She did not look horrified. She did not look sorry. She let out a short, annoyed sigh. "Oops." She giggled, covering her mouth. "Oh well. Clumsy me." Richard laughed, slapping the table. "Do not worry about it, darling. It is just a plate." Preston looked at the shards and shrugged. Yeah, do not sweat it, Mom. It is old anyway. We were going to throw all this stuff out tomorrow. The style is too grandmotherly. We need modern square plates. Slate may be old. Anyway, those plates had held my wife birthday cakes. Those plates had held the first solid food Maya ever ate. Those plates were the history of this family. I set the pitcher down quietly. I walked over to where the mess lay. I did not ask for a broom. I did not ask for help. I slowly lowered myself to my knees, my old joints popping in the silence. I began to pick up the pieces with my bare hands. I picked up a shard that held the gold rim. I picked up a piece that held the blue flower. I held them in my palm, feeling the sharp edges bite into my skin. I did not feel the pain. I felt a cold, absolute clarity. As I crawled under the table to retrieve a piece that had skittered away, Preston pushed his chair back. He looked down at me, at the old man crawling on the floor at his feet. He kicked a small piece of porcelain toward me with the toe of his Italian loafer. Then he spoke to his father in French. His voice was low, arrogant, filled with the confidence of a man who believes he is untouchable. "Laisse le faire," Preston said. "Let him do it." Then he added the phrase that would burn in my memory forever. "Demain la poubelle sort." Tomorrow, the trash goes out. He laughed, and Richard joined him, a deep, guttural chuckle that sounded like a drain clogging. "Oui," Richard replied in French. "Finalement, la maison sera propre." Finally, the house will be clean. I stayed under the table for a moment longer. My hand closed around the last shard of the plate. I squeezed it. I squeezed it until I felt a warm trickle of blood run down my palm, mixing with the dust on the floor. "Tomorrow the trash goes out." "You are right, Preston." I thought my internal voice sounding like the racking of a shotgun. "You are absolutely right." I crawled out from under the table. I stood up, clutching the broken pieces of my life to my chest. I did not look at them. I did not look at Maya, who was now crying silently, tears dripping onto her untouched food. I walked to the kitchen. I threw the shards into the trash can. The sound of them hitting the bottom was final. I washed my hands, watching the pink water swirl down the drain. I wrapped a bandage around the small cut on my palm. Then I turned off the kitchen light. "I am going to bed," I said into the darkness. Preston's voice floated in from the dining room. "Don't forget to set your alarm." Pops. Big day tomorrow. Early start. I walked down the hallway, past the living room, past the study where my life was packed into boxes, past the photos of ancestors who had survived slavery and segregation so that I could build this life. I went into my bedroom and closed the door. I did not go to sleep. I went to the closet and pulled out the suit bag I had hidden in the very back. It was not the tweed jacket with the elbow patches. It was a bespoke charcoal gray suit from Savile Row, tailored to fit me perfectly. I pulled out my shirt, starched and white. I pulled out my tie, a deep crimson red. I laid them out on the bed like armor. Then I went to the desk and pulled out the file, the real file, the file that contained the camera footage, the forensic accounting report, the signed loan document that was actually a lien, and the deed to the King Tower. I sat in the dark, listening to them laugh downstairs, listening to them break my home, piece by piece. Let them laugh, let them drink the wine, let them believe that the old monkey is asleep. I touched the bandage on my hand. Tomorrow the trash goes out. And I was going to be the sanitation worker. I checked my watch. It was 11 o'clock, 9 hours until the hearing. 9 hours until the trap snapped shut. I lay down on top of the covers, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the sun to rise, waiting for the moment when I would walk into that courtroom and introduce them to Luther King, not the father-in-law, not the victim, but the man who owned the very ground they stood on. "Sleep well, Preston," I whispered into the dark. Because when you wake up, the nightmare begins. Monday morning did not break with sunlight. It broke with the gray steel color of a prison door slamming shut. The house was awake long before the birds. I could hear the nervous energy vibrating through the floorboards. Preston was up at 5, pacing the hallway like a general before a battle. Only this general was fighting an unarmed opponent, or so he thought. I took my time getting dressed. I put on the charcoal gray suit I had laid out the night before. It was a suit I had bought in London 20 years ago, tailored to fit a man who commanded respect. Preston and his parents were too absorbed in their own greed to notice the quality of the fabric or the perfect cut of the lapels. To them, it was just an old man playing dress-up for his final day of freedom. At 9 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. It was not a friendly ring. It was the sharp, authoritative buzz of the executioner. Preston rushed to answer it, adjusting his tie, checking his reflection in the hallway mirror one last time. "Showtime," he whispered to himself. I heard him from the top of the stairs. He opened the door to admit a man carrying a briefcase that looked like it was made of alligator skin. This was Mr. Vance Preston, lawyer. A man with eyes like a lizard and a smile that vanished the moment he thought no one was looking. I had looked him up. Vance was a bottom feeder, a specialist in elder law, which was a polite way of saying he helped greedy children strip their parents of their assets before the state could intervene. I walked down the stairs, gripping the banister. The wood felt cool and solid under my hand. I descended slowly, my cane tapping a rhythmic warning that they chose to ignore. "Ah, there he is," Preston announced, gesturing up at me, looking like a ringmaster introducing a circus bear. "Mr. Vance, this is Luther, my father-in-law, the subject of the petition." Vance looked up at me. He did not see a man. He saw a billable hour. He saw a signature. He nodded curtly, not bothering to offer his hand. "Mr. King Vance," said, his voice dry and scratchy like sandpaper. "Please come sit down. We have a lot to get through, and the transport service is scheduled for 11, the transport service." They didn't even call it a car. They called it a transport, like I was hazardous waste being moved to a disposal site. I walked into the dining room. The table where I had eaten breakfast with my wife for 40 years was now covered in stacks of legal paper. The white pages glared under the chandelier. Richard and Sylvia were already seated, acting as witnesses. Richard was nursing a coffee, looking hungover, but eager. Sylvia was scrolling on her phone, already browsing for interior decorators. Maya was sitting at the far end of the table. She was wearing a gray sweater wrapped around herself as if she were freezing despite the heating being back on. She looked small, broken. Her eyes were red-rimmed and she was staring at her hands, twisting a paperclip until it snapped. I pulled out my chair at the head of the table. Preston tried to stop me. Pops, sit over there," Preston said, pointing to a side chair. "This seat is for Mr. Vance." I ignored him. I sat at the head of the table, my table. I placed my cane against the edge and folded my hands, waiting. Preston rolled his eyes and pulled up a chair next to Vance. "Fine, whatever. Let us just get this done." Vance opened his briefcase and pulled out 3 distinct piles of documents. He laid them out with the precision of a card dealer. "Okay, Mr. King." Vance began talking loudly and slowly, as if I were deaf. "Here is the situation. Due to your recent episodes and the medical evaluation provided by Dr. Thorne, it has been determined that you can no longer safely manage your own affairs." I sat stone still, blinking slowly, staring at a spot on the wall just above his head. Vance continued tapping the first pile. "This is the voluntary guardianship agreement. By signing this, you are agreeing that Preston Miller, your son-in-law, will act as your legal guardian, making all medical and financial decisions on your behalf. It is the best way to avoid a messy court hearing." He tapped the second pile. "This is the property transfer deed. It moves the title of this house into the Miller family trust for safekeeping. This allows Preston to liquidate the asset to pay for your care at Sunset Pines." He tapped the third pile. "This represents your savings and investment accounts. We need you to sign over access so we can secure the funds." Secure the funds. Use the funds to pay off gambling debts and buy a new Porsche was what he meant. Preston leaned forward, pushing a heavy black pen toward me. It was my pen, a Mont Blanc I had received when I retired from the army. He had stolen it from my desk. "Sign it, Pops," Preston said, his voice tight with anticipation. "Just sign on the yellow stickers and we can go. The car is coming to take you to the resort. It is going to be great. They have bingo. They have a garden. You love gardens." I looked at the pen. I looked at the papers. I looked at Maya. "Maya," I said softly. She flinched. She finally looked up and I saw the devastation in her eyes. She looked like a trapped animal caught between the husband she was terrified of losing and the father she was betraying. "I am sorry, Daddy," she whispered, tears spilling over and running down her cheeks. "I am so sorry. It is just sorry." It is for the best. Preston says, "It is the only way we have to." She could not finish the sentence. She choked on the lie. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly. Richard cleared his throat loudly. "Oh, for God's sake, stop the waterworks." "Maya, it is standard procedure." He is going to a home. Not the electric chair. Luther, pick up the pen. Sylvia chimed in, looking at her nails. Yes, hurry up, Luther. We have a brunch reservation at 1. We cannot be late. I looked at Preston. He was bouncing his leg under the table, nervous, greedy, impatient. Do it, Preston hissed. Come on, old man. Do not make me call the orderlies to restrain you. Sign the paper. I reached out. My hand, which had been resting calmly on the tablecloth, moved toward the pen. I saw Preston. Shoulders relax. I saw Vance open his notary stamp, ready to seal the deal. I saw Richard smirk. I picked up the pen. The room held its breath. I held the pen over the signature line of the guardianship agreement. I hovered there, letting them taste the victory, letting them believe that the heist was successful. Then I stopped. I slowly capped the pen. The click sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. I set the pen down gently on the table. Then I reached into the inside pocket of my charcoal suit. Preston frowned, confused. What are you doing, Pops? The papers are right there. I did not answer. I pulled out a single envelope. It was not white. It was not manila. It was a deep blood red, the color of a warning flag. It was thick, made of heavy, expensive paper. I placed the red envelope on the table, covering the signature line of the guardianship paper. Then with 2 fingers, I slid it across the mahogany surface toward Preston. The sound of the paper sliding against the wood was a whisper, a hiss. Preston looked at the envelope, then at me. His smile faltered just a fraction. What is this? He asked, a nervous laugh bubbling up inside his throat. A goodbye card. That is sweet, Pops, really. But read it, I said. I did not mumble. I did not stutter. I did not use my old man voice. I spoke with the clear, resonant baritone of a man who had commanded troops. The change in my voice hit him like a physical blow. He pulled back in his chair, his eyes widening. What? He stammered. I said, read it. I repeated harder, louder. Open the envelope. Preston, Vance looked at me sharply, his lizard eyes narrowing, realizing instantly that something had gone very wrong with the script. Richard stopped drinking his coffee. Preston reached out his hand, trembling slightly. He picked up the red envelope. He broke the seal, tearing the heavy paper. He pulled out the contents. It was not a card. It was a single sheet of paper written in elegant cursive script, and clipped to it was a bank statement. Preston's eyes scanned the paper. I watched his face. I watched the blood drain from his cheeks, leaving him looking like gray putty. I watched his mouth open and close like a fish on dry land. What is this? Preston whispered, his voice barely audible. It is a letter, I said, leaning back in my chair, crossing my arms over my chest. A letter from the landlord of the King Tower and a statement from the forensic accountant who has been tracking your offshore gambling accounts for the last 3 months. Preston dropped the paper as if it were burning. It fluttered to the table, landing right in front of Vance. Vance looked down, reading the header. His eyes bulged. Monsieur Dubois. Richard asked, confused, thinking it was the investor. Who is it for? I looked at Richard, then at Sylvia, then finally fixed my gaze on Preston. It is written in French, I said calmly, but I think you will find the translation quite easy to understand. Preston looked at me, terror dawning in his eyes, pure absolute terror. You speak, he gasped. I leaned forward, the tiger finally breaking cover. Continue, Preston, I said, a cold smile playing on my lips. Read it out loud. Or is your French only good for insulting old men? The room was so quiet I could hear the quartz movement of the clock on the wall ticking away the seconds of their demise. Tick, tick, tick. Preston stared at the red envelope lying on the polished mahogany table. It sat there like a pool of fresh blood against the dark wood, vivid and alarming. He looked at me, his eyes wide and confused, searching for the familiar vacuous expression of the senile old man he thought he controlled. But he did not find it. The fog had cleared. The curtain had risen. Open it, Preston, I said, my voice steady, devoid of the tremor I had feigned for weeks. Preston swallowed hard, his Adam apple bobbing in his throat. He looked at Vance, the lawyer seeking guidance. Vance shrugged a gesture that said this was not part of his hourly rate. Preston's hand reached out, trembling visibly. His fingers brushed the heavy textured paper of the envelope. He slid his thumb under the flap and tore it open. The sound of tearing paper was loud, sharp, violent. He pulled out the document inside. It was a single sheet of cream-colored linen paper stamped with a gold seal at the top, clipped to a thick stack of spreadsheets. Preston unfolded the letter. He squinted, trying to read the text, his brow furrowed, confusion morphing into panic. It is in a foreign language, Preston stammered, looking up at me. What is this? Is this some kind of joke? It looks like... French. Richard leaned over, snatching the paper from his son's hand. Let me see that. I took French in boarding school. Richard adjusted his reading glasses, holding the paper under the light of the chandelier. He read the first line and his face went pale. The ruddiness of the alcohol drained away, leaving him looking like wet dough. He looked at the letterhead, then he looked at me, then back at the letter. My God, Richard whispered. The letterhead. It is from the King Tower Management Group. It is addressed to you, Preston. To me, Preston asked, snatching the letter back. What does it say? Translate it. Dad. Richard swallowed his hands, shaking. It says, it is a rejection of your lease application. Preston. And it says the owner of the building has personally flagged your file for attempted fraud. Fraud, Preston yelled, standing up, knocking his chair back. That is impossible. I gave them the deposit last night. I gave them $50,000. I sat there motionless, my hands folded calmly on the table, watching them unravel like a cheap sweater. Then I did something they never expected. The old monkey spoke. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. I locked eyes with Preston, pinning him in place with a gaze that had stared down men far more dangerous than him. Écoute-moi, bien petit con, I said. The words rolled off my tongue with the smooth, guttural precision of a native Parisian. The accent was not the classroom French of a tourist, it was the street French of the Rue de Rivoli, the French of the boardroom and the back alley. It was the language of a man who had lived, loved, and conquered in the City of Light. Preston froze. His mouth hung open, a silent scream dying in his throat. Cette maison n'est pas à toi. I continued my voice, dropping an octave, resonating with the authority of a judge. Passing sentence. Tu n'es qu'un voleur habillé en prince. Listen to me. Well, you little idiot. This house is not yours. You are just a thief, dressed like a prince. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a bomb blast aftermath. Richard's glass slipped from his hand. It hit the table rim first, shattering instantly, spilling hot coffee all over the legal papers, soaking the guardianship petition in a brown stain. Sylvia gasped, clutching her pearls, her eyes bugging out of her head. Maya gasped loudly, covering her mouth. Daddy, you... I did not look at Maya. I kept my eyes fixed on Preston, destroying him with my gaze. You seem surprised, Preston, I said, switching to English. My English was crisp, sharp, devoid of any stutter or slur. It was the voice of Master Sergeant Luther King. It was the voice of the man who built an empire from nothing. You speak French, Preston whispered, his legs giving out beneath him. He collapsed back into his chair, his face the color of ash. You understood. I stood up slowly. I did not use my cane. I kicked the cane away, and it clattered loudly across the floor. I stood to my full height, 6'2", of righteous indignation. I walked around the head of the table, moving with the grace of a predator. Understood. I repeated, pacing slowly behind his chair. I lived in Paris for 15 years, Preston. From 1970 to 1985. I was not just a soldier, I was a logistics contractor helping rebuild the supply chains of Europe. I negotiated deals in boardrooms where men like you would not even be allowed to pour the coffee. I stopped behind Richard, leaning down close to his ear. Richard flinched as if I were holding a knife. I heard everything, I whispered. Le vieux singe. The old monkey. That is what you called me at the restaurant, right? The old monkey doesn't know he is drinking vinegar. I walked over to Sylvia, who was trembling so hard her jewelry rattled. And you, Sylvia, old useless debris, that is what you called me when I was fixing the sink. You said I should be smothered in my sleep. You said I was worth more dead than alive. Sylvia whimpered, shrinking away from me, looking at Preston for help. But Preston was catatonic. And you? Preston, my son-in-law. I walked back to him, standing directly in front of him, blocking the light. You called me trash last night while you were eating off my dead wife China, you said. Tomorrow the trash goes out. I leaned down, placing my hands on the table, leaning into his face until I could smell the fear on him. Well, Preston, I am the trash, and I am taking myself out. But before I go, I thought we should clarify a few points of ownership regarding the trash can. I pointed a long finger at the letter lying in the puddle of coffee. You wanted to rent the penthouse at King Tower. You wanted to impress Monsieur Dubois with your address. Preston nodded dumbly. Unable to speak, I bought the land. King Tower stands on in 1995, I said softly. I designed it, I built it, and I own it. The King in King Tower is not a royal title. Preston, it is my last name, Preston. Eyes bulged. He looked like he was having a stroke. You own the tower. I own the tower, I own the management company, and I own the $50,000 check you wrote to yourself last night using the funds from the account I let you access. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the document he had signed the night before, the loan agreement disguised as a receipt. You signed this, I said, holding it up. You acknowledged a personal debt of $50,000 secured by your assets, and since you defaulted on the lease application before it was even processed, that debt is due immediately. Vance, the lawyer who had been sitting in stunned silence, suddenly grabbed his briefcase. He stood up, his face pale. Mr. Miller, Vance stammered, you did not tell me he was lucid. You did not tell me he owned commercial real estate. I did not know. Preston shrieked, his voice cracking. I thought he was a retired railway worker. I thought he was poor. You thought wrong, I roared, slamming my hand on the table, making them all jump. You saw a black man in an old coat and you assumed he was nothing. You saw a man who listens instead of talks and you assumed he was stupid. You judged the book by the cover, Preston, and now the book is about to close on your fingers. I walked over to the window, pulling back the curtains, letting the bright morning light flood the room, exposing the stains on the table, the sweat on their faces, the ruin of their plans. You have 3 insults to answer for, I said, turning back to face them. Monkey debris. Trash. 3 insults, 3 strikes. And in this house, just like in baseball, 3 strikes means you are out. I looked at Maya. She was looking at me with wide eyes, seeing her father for the first time in years. She was not afraid of me. She was afraid for herself, but there was something else in her eyes. Respect, awe. Daddy, she whispered. I didn't know. You didn't ask, Maya, I said, my voice softening just a fraction for her. You were too busy stealing your mother ring to ask me who I really was. Maya flinched, burying her face in her hands again. I turned back to Preston. Now about that eviction notice you served me, I said, picking up the guardianship papers and tearing them in half slowly, letting the sound rip through the air. I think we need to talk about who exactly is getting evicted today. Because according to the deed of this house, which is also in a trust, you never bothered to check the occupancy, is at the sole discretion of the grantor. I dropped the torn papers onto Preston's lap, and the grantor is me. The room spun with the gravity of the revelation. They were not just caught, they were crushed. They were sitting in the wreckage of their own arrogance, and I was the demolition expert holding the detonator. Richard tried to speak, his voice blustering, trying to regain some shred of dignity. Now see here. Luther, this is all a misunderstanding. We were just trying to help you. We thought... Stop, I said, cutting him off like a guillotine blade. Do not speak to me in English, and definitely do not speak to me in French. Your accent is atrocious, Richard. It offends my ears. I walked to the door and opened it wide. The transport is coming at 11, right? The van to take the invalid to the nursing home. I looked at my watch. It was 10:55. Perfect timing, I said. I looked out the window. A white van was pulling up to the curb, but it was not a medical transport van. It was a police van, and behind it was a black sedan I recognized. It was Saul Carr. I turned back to them, a wolfish smile spreading across my face. The ride is here, but I do not think it is for me. Preston looked out the window and saw the flashing lights. He stood up, knocking his chair over, panic taking over completely. What did you do? He screamed. What did you do, old man? I adjusted my cufflinks, smoothing the sleeves of my suit. I took out the trash. "Preston," I said simply. And then the doorbell rang. Denial is a powerful drug, and my son-in-law. Preston Miller was overdosing on it right in front of my eyes, even after I had spoken to him in flawless Parisian French, even after I had thrown the evidence of his debt onto the table. He could not process the reality shift. His brain had been wired for so long to see me as a helpless old fool that it simply refused to accept the predator standing before him. Preston scrambled backward, his chair screeching against the floorboards. He looked at Vance, his lawyer with wild, desperate eyes begging for a lifeline that was not there. "He is crazy," Preston shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. "He is having an episode, Vance. Do you see this? He is speaking in tongues. He is hallucinating. He thinks he is a landlord. He thinks he is some kind of tycoon. It is the dementia. It is temporal displacement. Dr. Thorne warned us about this. He thinks he is back in the war or something." Vance did not look convinced. Vance looked like a man who realized he had walked into a minefield without a map. He was slowly closing his briefcase, trying to make himself invisible. "He is not hallucinating, Preston," Vance said quietly. His French was native. "And that document regarding the loan, it is legally binding. You signed a confession of debt, Preston." "No!" Preston screamed, hysterical now, sweat pouring down his face, ruining his expensive spray tan. "It is a trick. He probably memorized a few phrases from a movie. He is acting. Look at him. He is wearing a suit. He probably stole from a thrift store. He is a retired railway worker. He moved boxes for a living. He is a nobody." I stood there adjusting my cuffs, watching him flail. It was pathetic. It was like watching a child try to hold back the tide with a plastic shovel. "You are right, Preston," I said, my voice calm, cutting through his hysteria. "I did move boxes. But you never asked what was in the boxes, and you never asked how many trains I owned." Before Preston could respond, the front door opened. There was no knock because the man entering had a key. A key I had given him 30 years ago. Saul walked into the dining room. He did not look like the high-priced lawyers Preston was used to seeing on TV. Saul looked like a bulldog in a rumpled trench coat. He had a scar running down his chin from a Union riot in 1974, and he carried a battered leather satchel that had seen more courtrooms than Vance had seen hot dinners. Behind Saul stood 2 uniformed police officers and a man in a plain suit holding a video camera. "Who is this?" Preston yelled, backing up until he hit the sideboard. "Who are you people? You cannot just walk into my house." Saul stopped in the middle of the room. He looked at Preston with a mixture of amusement and disgust. Then he looked at me and gave a sharp nod. "Morning." "Otis," Saul grumbled, ignoring Preston completely. "Sorry, I am late. Traffic on the bridge was a nightmare. I brought the cavalry, though." He gestured to the officers. "This is private property," Preston shrieked, trying to regain control. "Get out! I am the legal guardian of this estate. I want you out right now." Saul laughed. It was a dry, rasping sound. He walked over to the table and dropped his heavy satchel right on top of the guardianship papers, making the coffee cups jump. "Actually," Sonny Saul said, "you are not the guardian of anything. You are barely the guardian of your own bladder right now, judging by the wet spot on your trousers." Preston looked down, mortified. Saul turned to the police officers. "Gentlemen, if you would be so kind as to secure the exits. We have a significant amount of flight risk in this room." Then Saul opened his bag. He pulled out a laptop and a portable speaker. He set them up on the dining table, moving aside the cold remains of their breakfast. "Mr. Miller here seems to think my client is suffering from dementia," Saul announced to the room, addressing Vance and the parents. "Let us review the medical evidence." "Shall we?" Saul hit the space bar. The room was filled with the sound of static, followed by a voice, crystal clear and undeniable. It was Preston's voice, recorded just yesterday in Dr. Thorne's office. "Here is the other half as agreed. 5,000 a pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Miller. Maybe some heavy sedatives to keep him drooling in the corner." The recording played on, filling the silence with the sound of their conspiracy. "Sedatives. Yeah, that might be good. Keep him drooling in the corner, easier to manage." Preston's face went from red to white to a sickly shade of green. He looked at the speaker as if it were a bomb. That is AI," he stammered. "It is a deep fake. You faked my voice." Saul ignored him. He clicked another file. "This next exhibit concerns Mrs. Sylvia Miller." Saul said, looking at Preston's mother, who was currently trying to hide behind her husband. Sylvia froze. The screen on the laptop flickered to life. It showed a black and white video feed, sharp and high definition. It was footage from inside my bedroom recorded 3 days ago. On the screen, Sylvia walked into my room. She looked around, checking the door. Then she walked straight to the dresser. She opened the top drawer, rummaging through my socks. Then she found it. My gold Patek Philippe watch, a gift from the Railway Union for 40 years of service. On the screen, Sylvia held the watch up to the light. She smiled. Then she slipped it into her bra and walked out of the room. In the dining room, the real Sylvia let out a strangled cry. She clutched her chest, looking at Richard. I was just keeping it safe, she squeaked. I was afraid he would lose it. Safe, Saul repeated, raising an eyebrow. Safe in your undergarments. Madam, interesting storage method. We also have footage of you trying to pawn it yesterday afternoon at a shop on 5th Street. Unfortunately for you, the pawnbroker is an old friend of Mr. King. He called us immediately. Richard slumped in his chair, putting his head in his hands. He knew it was over. He knew the game was up, but Saul was not done. He turned back to Preston. And finally, the masterstroke, Saul said. He pulled a document from his bag. It was a lease agreement, the lease for the King Tower penthouse. You wanted to move your company into the King Tower, Saul said, holding the paper up. You wanted the prestige. You wanted the view. You told your investors you had secured the location. Preston nodded dumbly, unable to speak. Well, here is the rejection letter, Saul said, dropping it onto the table. It is signed by the owner of the building. Preston looked at the signature. It did not say a corporation name. It did not say a management firm. It was signed in bold black ink. Otis Luther King. Preston looked up at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. You are the landlord, he whispered. I stepped forward, leaning on the table. I am the landlord, Preston, I said. And I am the CEO of King Logistics, a company that moves 40% of the freight on the eastern seaboard. I retired from the daily operations 10 years ago, but I kept the assets and I kept the building. Vance, the lizard lawyer, stood up abruptly. He was sweating. Mr. King, Mr. Saul. Clearly there has been a mistake. I was not informed of these facts, my client. Mr. Miller represented to me that. Sit down, Vance, Saul barked, cutting him off. You are done here, unless you want to be named as a co-conspirator in a fraud case involving elder abuse, grand larceny, and forgery. I suggest you sit down and shut up. Vance sat down instantly. Saul turned to the room, his voice booming with the authority of the law. Let us be clear about who is sitting at this head of the table. This man is not a senile invalid. He is Luther King, a decorated war hero and one of the shrewdest businessmen in this city. He is not incapacitated. He is not confused, but he is very, very disappointed. Saul pointed a finger at Preston. You tried to steal his house. You tried to steal his dignity. You bribed a doctor to falsify medical records, which is a felony. You conspired to commit fraud against the court, which is another felony, and you stole $50,000 from him under false pretenses. Preston began to cry. It was a pathetic sound, a weeping that had no remorse, only fear. I didn't mean to, he blubbered. I needed the money. The loan sharks. They said they would kill me, and now you have killed yourself, Saul said, cold and final. Or at least your freedom. One of the police officers stepped forward, handcuffs jingling at his belt. Preston Miller, you are under arrest for fraud, forgery, and elder abuse. Stand up and put your hands behind your back. Preston stood up, shaking his knees, knocking together. No. Please, Dad. Do something. Richard looked away, refusing to meet his son. I didn't know about the doctor, Preston. You went too far. You went too far too, Richard, Saul said, signaling the second officer. Mrs. Sylvia Miller, you are under arrest for grand larceny, and Mr. Richard Miller. We have a warrant here for you as well, courtesy of the state of Florida, outstanding fraud charges regarding a timeshare scheme. The room erupted in chaos. Sylvia screamed as the officer took her arm. Richard tried to run toward the back door, but the plainclothes officer blocked him easily, shoving him back into his chair. I stood in the center of the storm, calm and untouched. Maya sat at the end of the table, watching her family be dismantled. She was crying, but she was not screaming. She looked at me, and for the first time in her life, she saw the man behind the father. I walked over to her. The officers were cuffing Preston. He was sobbing, begging, shouting that he was a CEO, that this was a mistake. I leaned down to Maya. You have a choice, I whispered to her. She looked up at me, her makeup, running her face a mask of tragedy. What choice, she choked out. You can go with them, I said, gesturing to the husband who had sold her out and the parents who had used her. Or you can stay here. But if you stay here, Maya, you stay as my daughter, not as his wife, not as their victim. You stay as a king. Maya looked at Preston, who was now being dragged toward the door, his expensive suit bunching up around his shoulders. He looked at her and screamed, Maya, call the lawyer, call the bank, get the money, fix this. She looked at him, then she looked at me. She took a deep breath. She reached down to her left hand. She pulled off her wedding band, the cheap gold band Preston had replaced her real ring with. She placed it on the table. Officer, she called out, her voice shaky but audible. The policeman paused, holding Preston by the arm. Yes, ma'am. My husband has something else in his pocket, she said, pointing at Preston. He has my mother, sapphire ring. He stole it from the pawn shop receipt. He made me sell it, but he kept the ticket. Preston's eyes went wide. You bitch, he screamed. You traitor! I put my hand on Maya's shoulder, gripping it tight. That is my girl, I said softly. Saul smiled, closing his laptop. Take them away, gentlemen, Saul said. The air in here is getting stale. As they dragged Preston out the front door, kicking and screaming strictly in English. Now I walked to the window to watch the neighbors. The mailman was watching Preston Miller. Wanted to be famous. He wanted everyone to know his name. Well, now they did. He was the man who tried to hustle the hustler, the man who tried to outsmart the fox, and he was the man who was about to trade his Italian suit for an orange jumpsuit that fit significantly. Worse, I turned back to the room. The table was a mess of coffee and broken dreams, but the house was finally quiet, and for the first time in months, the air smelled clean. Mathematics is a cruel language because, unlike English or French, it does not allow for lies. 2 + 2 will always equal 4, no matter how charming your smile is or how expensive your suit might be. Preston Miller had spent his entire life trying to bend numbers to his will, trying to make negative balances appear positive, trying to make debt look like leverage. But as I stood there in the dining room watching the color drain from his face, I knew that the equation had finally balanced itself out, and the result was 0. Saul leaned back against the sideboard, looking like a man who had just enjoyed a very satisfying meal. He tapped a thick folder on the table with his index finger. Let us talk about the deficit, Saul said, his voice gravelly and low, because the state of New York takes a very dim view of financial irregularities, especially when they involve vulnerable seniors. Preston tried to speak, but his voice was a dry croak. He looked at the handcuffs on his wrists as if they were alien objects attached to his body. I will pay it back, Preston stammered. I will fix this. I just need time. Time is an asset you no longer possess, I said, stepping forward. I looked down at the ledger Saul had prepared. Item number 1, $18,000. Preston looked up confused. $18,000. The rent for your apartment, I clarified. The apartment you were evicted from last week. You told Maya it was a plumbing issue. You told me it was a renovation. But the truth is, you hadn't paid your landlord in 6 months. You were squatting. Preston licked his lips. So what? That is between me and the landlord. It has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with me, I replied calmly, because last Tuesday morning, right after you moved your boxes into my hallway, I made a phone call. I called your landlord, Mr. Henderson. A nice man, but terrible at cash flow management. He was desperate to recover some of his losses. So I made him an offer. I bought your debt. Preston's eyes widened. You did what I purchased the debt for 60 cents on the dollar. I said I now own the $18,000 judgment against you. You do not owe Mr. Henderson any more. You owe Luther King. And unlike Mr. Henderson, I do not accept excuses, and I certainly do not accept bounced checks. Saul chuckled, flipping a page in the file. Item number 2, Saul announced. $50,000. Preston shook his head. That was a loan, Pops. You signed the check. It was a family loan for the business. It was a theft. I corrected him, my voice sharp, cutting through his lies. You manipulated a man you believed to be mentally incompetent into signing a check. You used fear and intimidation. You threatened to put me in a home if I did not comply. That is not a loan, Preston. That is extortion. But here is the funny part. I leaned closer, dropping my voice to a conspiratorial whisper. That money inside the savings account, the money you thought you were stealing. It did not come from my pension. It came from a transfer I made 3 days ago, from the King Logistics Operating Fund. I moved my own money into that account, just so you could steal it. I baited the hook, Preston, and you swallowed it whole. You stole my money to pay me a deposit on a building I already own. The money never actually left my ecosystem. It just moved from my left pocket to my right pocket while capturing your fingerprints on a felony charge in between. Preston's mouth opened and closed silently. He was realizing the scope of the trap. He was realizing that every move he had made for the last week had been choreographed by the old monkey he despised. And finally Saul said, closing the file with a heavy thud. Item number 3, the medical fraud. The police officer holding Preston's arm tightened his grip. We just received confirmation from the precinct, the officer stated. Dr. Aris Thorne was taken into custody 20 minutes ago at his clinic. He was trying to shred files when we arrived. He has already cut a deal, Mr. Miller. He gave us the audio recordings. He gave us the envelope with your fingerprints on the cash. He is singing like a canary to avoid losing his license. Preston's knees buckled. The officer had to hold him up, preventing him from collapsing onto the floor. It is a federal crime, Preston, I said, looking him in the eye. Conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Conspiracy to deprive a citizen of their civil rights. You tried to use the medical system as a weapon. You tried to erase me. Preston, you tried to turn a living man into a ghost, just so you could buy a Porsche. I turned to Richard and Sylvia. They were sitting frozen in their chairs, trying to make themselves small, trying to disappear into the upholstery. And you two, I said, walking toward them. Richard flinched, spilling the rest of his coffee onto his trousers. We are just guests. Luther, Richard stammered, trying to summon some of his old bluster. We didn't know. We are victims here too. Preston lied to us. You are not victims. I said, my voice cold. You are accomplices. You sat at my table. You drank my wine. You ate off my wife, China, and while you did it, you mocked me. You planned to renovate my kitchen while I was still cooking in it. You are not guests. I looked at the officer standing by the door. Officer, these two people are trespassing. Trespassing, Sylvia shrieked, clutching her pearls. We were invited. We have been staying here for days. Your invitation was revoked, I said simply. Last Tuesday when you called me. Old debris. I revoked your status as guests. Legally speaking, I filed a notice with my attorney regarding unwanted occupants. You are intruders. And in this state, refusing to leave a property after being notified is a criminal offense. Saul nodded, pulling another paper from his bag. The notice was filed and time-stamped 3 days ago, Mr. and Mrs. Miller have no lease, no residency rights, and no invitation. They are squatters. Officer, remove them, I said, turning my back on them. Richard stood up, his face purple with rage. You cannot do this, Luther. I know people. I have lawyers. You have warrants, Saul reminded him. The Florida State Police are very eager to reunite with you, Richard. And I believe the fraud division in Nevada has a reserved suite for your wife. The plainclothes officer stepped forward, grabbing Richard by the arm. Let us go. Mr. Miller, do not make a scene. Do not make a scene. The irony was delicious. They had spent their entire lives making scenes, creating drama, needing to be the center of attention. And now they were getting exactly what they wanted. The neighbors were gathering on the sidewalk, drawn by the flashing lights and the commotion. I walked to the window, pulling back the lace curtain. I watched as the officers marched them out. Preston came first. He was not walking with his usual swagger. He was stumbling, weeping, begging the officer to let him make a phone call, begging Maya to help him. Maya stand by the window next to me. She did not move to help him. She stood like a statue, her face wet with tears but her spine straight. She watched the man she had loved, the man she had feared, being shoved into the back of a police van like a common criminal. Then came Richard and Sylvia. They were arguing loudly, blaming each other. Sylvia was screaming that Richard had lost their money. Richard was screaming that Sylvia greed had gotten them caught. They looked small. They looked cheap. They looked exactly like what they were. Grifters stripped of their costumes. I watched the van doors slam shut. The sound echoed through the house, final and absolute. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was clean. It was the silence of a fever breaking. I turned back to the room. The dining room was a disaster. Coffee stains on the wood, papers scattered everywhere, chairs overturned. But it was my mess, and I could clean it. Saul walked over and put a hand on my shoulder. "It is done, Otis," he said quietly. "The district attorney is already reviewing the evidence with Dr. Thorne testimony and the video footage. They are going away for a long time. 5 years, minimum, maybe 10 for Preston, given the elder abuse enhancements." I nodded slowly, feeling the adrenaline begin to fade, leaving me tired. Simply tired. "Thank you, Saul," I said. "I couldn't have done it without you." Saul smiled, picking up his battered bag. "That is what friends are for. And besides, I always hated that little weasel." I looked at Maya. She was staring at the empty chair where Preston had sat, the chair where he had signed his life away. I walked over to her. I did not touch her. I gave her space. I gave her the dignity of her own grief. He owed me $18,000 for rent. I said to the room, my voice soft. He stole $50,000 from the savings, but the biggest number, Maya, the number that matters most. She looked up at me, her eyes hollow. "What number, Daddy?" She whispered. "0, I said. She frowned, confused. "0 is the amount of respect he had for you," I said gently, "and 0 is the amount of power he has over you now. You are at 0. Maya, and 0 is a good place to start. It is the foundation. It is where you build from." Maya looked at the table at the wedding ring she had left there. She picked it up, holding it in her palm. Then she walked to the trash can. The same can where I had thrown the broken china. She dropped the ring in. It made a small, insignificant clink. "0, she whispered, wiping her face. I smiled. It was a sad smile, but it was real. "Come on," I said. "Let us clean up this mess. I have a feeling we are going to need a lot of trash bags because the trash had indeed gone out, but there was still a lot of cleaning to do before this house could be a home again." The flashing blue lights faded into the distance, taking with them the noise, the chaos, and the man who had turned my home into a battlefield. The front door stood open, letting in the cool, autumn air that smelled of wet leaves and exhaust fumes. I walked over and pushed it shut. The click of the latch was the loudest sound I had heard in days. It was the sound of a seal breaking, the sound of a vacuum forming. I turned around to face the wreckage of my dining room. Maya was still standing by the window. Her hands were gripping the sill so tightly that her fingertips were white. She was staring at the empty street where the police van had disappeared, taking her husband and her in-laws to a holding cell in the city center. She looked like a ghost haunting her own life. Her shoulders were shaking, a subtle tremor that started in her spine and radiated out to her extremities. I did not go to her. I did not offer her a handkerchief. I did not offer her a hug. I walked to the head of the table and sat down in my chair. The chair Preston had tried to banish me from. I placed my hands flat on the mahogany table, feeling the wood, feeling the history. Maya turned slowly. She looked at me and then she looked at the empty chairs where Richard and Sylvia had been sitting moments ago. She looked at the coffee stain on the rug. She looked at the torn pieces of the guardianship papers scattered on the floor. Then her legs gave out. She didn't fall. She crumbled. It was as if the strings holding her up had been cut. She sank to her knees right there on the hard floor amidst the debris of her failed coup. She buried her face in her hands and a sound ripped out of her throat that was raw and primal. It was the sound of a child realizing they are lost in the woods. "Daddy," she wailed. The word was broken, fractured. "Daddy, I am so sorry." I sat still watching her. I remembered when she was 5 years old and she had scraped her knee. I had picked her up, kissed the wound, and given her ice cream. I remembered when she was 16 and had her heart broken by a boy at school. I had held her while she cried and told her she was a queen. But I could not hold her now because the woman kneeling on my floor was not a child. She was a 32-year-old accomplice. She had stood by while her husband called me a monkey. She had stood by while they planned to throw me into a state facility. She had stolen her mother ring. "Please forgive me." Maya sobbed, crawling forward slightly, her designer jeans dragging through the coffee spill. "I didn't want to do it. He made me. He said we had no choice. He said you were sick." I leaned forward slightly, resting my chin on my steepled fingers. He said I was sick. Maya, I said, my voice low and even, and you believed him. You lived with me for 30 years. You know my mind, you know my strength, but you chose to believe a man you had known for 3 years because he promised you a penthouse. No, it wasn't the penthouse, she cried, shaking her head violently. It was fear. Daddy, I was afraid of him. He yells, he throws things. I didn't know what to do. I looked at her coldly. Fear is not an excuse for betrayal, Maya, I said. Fear is a test, and you failed it. You watched them treat me like a dog in my own house. You watched your mother China get smashed and you said nothing. You watched me eat in silence while they mocked me in a language they thought I didn't understand. And when I needed you most, when I looked at you in that doctor office begging for help with my eyes, you looked away. Maya put her forehead against the floor, her body racking with sobs. I will fix it, she gasped. I promise I will divorce him. I will annul the marriage. I will testify against him. I will do whatever you want. Just please, Daddy, do not look at me like that. Do not look at me like I am a stranger. I stood up. The chair scraped against the floor. You are a stranger, Maya, I said. I walked over to the sideboard. There was one item left there. A small, plain, white envelope. It was not the red envelope of destruction I had given Preston. It was something else, something I had prepared 3 days ago when I realized that saving my daughter meant breaking her heart. I walked over to where she was kneeling. I stood over her, my shadow falling across her trembling back. Stand up! Maya, I commanded. She froze. She lifted her head, looking up at me through swollen eyes. She saw the soldier in my face. She saw the father who had drawn a line in the sand. She scrambled to her feet, unsteady, wiping her face with her sleeve, ruining her silk blouse. I held out the envelope. Take this, I said. She reached out with shaking hands, crying softly. Is it the eviction notice? Are you kicking me out? Open it, I said. She tore open the envelope. Her fingers were clumsy, terrified. Inside she found 2 things, a single cashier check and a printed piece of paper. She looked at the check first. $5,000, she whispered, confusion clouding her grief. It is not a lot of money, I said. It is not the millions you thought you were going to inherit. It is not the trust fund I locked down yesterday. Yes, Maya, I locked your trust fund. You cannot access a penny of the $2 million that was waiting for you. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. You locked the trust, I did, I said. You proved you cannot handle wealth. You proved that money makes you weak, makes you a target for wolves like Preston. So I took the bait away. I pointed to the check. That $5,000 is all you get. It is enough for a deposit on a studio apartment. It is enough for food for 2 months. It is enough to buy a suit for a job interview. Job interview, she asked, her voice trembling. I pointed to the second piece of paper inside the envelope. It was an airline ticket. One way. Economy class. Chicago, she read. Destination Chicago. Departing tonight at 9 p.m. I nodded. Your Aunt Sarah lives in Chicago, I said. I called her last night. I told her everything. I told her you were in trouble and that you needed a place to sleep. She agreed to take you in. But she has rules, you know, Sarah. She does not tolerate laziness, and she certainly does not tolerate self-pity. Maya looked at the ticket, then at me, fear rising in her eyes again. You are sending me away, she whispered. You are banishing me. I am saving you, I corrected her. My voice cracked just a little, betraying the pain I felt inside. I am saving you from yourself. Maya, if you stay here, you will always be Luther King daughter. You will always be the victim, relying on me to fix your mistakes. You will wait for the lawyers to handle Preston. You will wait for me to pay your bills, and you will never learn who you actually are. I took a step closer, looking deep into her eyes. I cannot save you, Maya, I said softly. You have to save yourself. You have to go to Chicago. You have to get a job. A real job, not a fake job at a fake agency. You have to work. You have to pay your own rent. You have to learn what $18,000 actually feels like when you earn it hour by hour. But I am alone, she sobbed. I can't do it alone. You are not alone, I said, pointing at her chest. You have yourself. You have the blood of your mother and me in your veins. You have resilience. Maya, you just buried it under a pile of expensive clothes and lies. You need to dig it out. I looked at the clock on the wall. You have 2 hours to pack, I said. Pack only what you can carry. 2 suitcases, leave the furniture, leave the car. The Mercedes is leased in Preston, name, and the repo men are coming for it tomorrow. Take only what is yours. Maya stared at the ticket. She looked at the check. She looked at the ringless finger on her left hand. She took a deep breath, a shuddering, ragged breath. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing the mascara across her cheek. Will you ever forgive me? She asked, her voice small. I looked at her. I looked at the little girl who used to ride on my shoulders. When you find your self-respect. Maya, I said, when you can look in the mirror and like what you see, come back here. Come back and knock on my door. And if the woman standing there is my daughter and not Preston wife, I will open it. She nodded. She understood. It was a hard road, but it was the only road out of the valley. She didn't try to hug me again. She knew she hadn't earned it yet. Thank you, Daddy, she whispered. She turned and walked toward the stairs. She walked slowly, heavily, as if she were carrying the weight of the world. But she didn't look back. She went up to her room to pack her life into 2 suitcases. I stood alone in the dining room. The silence returned, but this time it was not empty. It was pregnant with possibility. I walked to the table and picked up the Mont Blanc pen I had used to sign the fake loan. I put it back in my pocket. I looked out the window at the setting sun. The sky was turning a brilliant shade of purple and gold, the colors of a bruise healing. I had lost a son-in-law. I had lost the illusion of a happy family, but I had saved my dignity. And maybe, just maybe, I had planted the seed that would save my daughter. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of tap water. It tasted clean. It tasted like freedom. 2 hours later, I heard a taxi honk outside. Maya came down the stairs. She was wearing jeans and a simple coat. She had 2 suitcases. She looked tired, but she looked real. Goodbye, Daddy, she said from the doorway. Go get him, kid, I said, raising my glass. She closed the door. I locked it. Then I went to my study and put on a Miles Davis record. I sat in my leather chair, the one Preston had tried to replace, and I closed my eyes. The music washed over me, cleaning the air, filling the empty spaces. The war was over. The general could finally rest, but as the trumpet soared, hitting those high, clear notes, I knew that the peace was just beginning, and tomorrow I had a building to run. The rain in Paris tastes different than the rain in New York. It tastes like history. It tastes like memory. It tastes like peace. I am sitting at a small round table outside a cafe in the Marais district, watching the water run down the cobblestones. The air is brisk, smelling of roasted coffee beans and damp wool. It is a Tuesday afternoon, a time when Preston Miller used to claim he was closing million-dollar deals while sitting in his underwear playing video games. I look at the glass sitting in front of me. It is a Pinot Noir, a vintage from Burgundy that costs more than Preston's entire wardrobe. It is rich, earthy, and complex. It does not taste like vinegar. It tastes like victory. It has been exactly 365 days since the police van pulled away from my curb. 365 days since I took out the trash. I checked the time on my watch. It is the same Patek Philippe that Sylvia tried to steal. The gold feels warm against my wrist. In New York, it is morning. In the upstate correctional facility where Preston is currently residing, it is time for the morning head count. I often wonder if he speaks French to his cellmate. I wonder if he tells them that he used to be a CEO, that he almost leased a penthouse in the King Tower. I wonder if he realizes that the view from his cell window, a brick wall and a slice of gray sky, is the only real estate he will ever occupy again. According to Saul, who keeps me updated with a grim satisfaction, Preston is not doing well inside. The other inmates do not appreciate his arrogance, and without his designer suits and his spray tan, he is just a small, frightened man realizing that the world does not owe him a living. He is serving 5 years for fraud and elder abuse. He will be 40 when he gets out. Older, broke and marked as a felon. As for Richard and Sylvia, they are living in a trailer park outside of Tampa. They avoided prison by turning state evidence against their own son, testifying that Preston was the mastermind behind the guardianship scheme. They threw him to the wolves to save their own skins, proving once again that loyalty in that family was as fake as their jewelry. They live on Social Security now, the very government handout they used to mock. I take a sip of wine, letting the liquid settle on my tongue. But my thoughts today are not on the villains. My thoughts are on Chicago. I reach into the pocket of my trench coat and pull out a letter. It arrived yesterday. It is handwritten on simple notebook paper. The handwriting is familiar, but it is different now. It is firmer. It presses harder into the page. It is the handwriting of a woman who works with her hands, Maya. She did not come back to New York. Not yet. She is living in a studio apartment in a neighborhood that Preston would have sneered at. She wakes up at 4 in the morning every day to knead dough at a bakery called the Flower Pot. She stands on her feet for 10 hours a day. She burns her fingers on hot trays. She comes home smelling of yeast and exhaustion, but she pays her own rent. Enclosed in the letter was a check for $500. It is the first installment of the money I gave her. She insisted on paying it back every cent. She wrote, "Daddy, I made rent this month, and I had enough left over for this. I am tired, but I am not afraid anymore. I look in the mirror and I see someone I know. I look at the check. It is the most valuable piece of paper I own, worth more than the deed to the King Tower. I will not cash it. I will frame it and hang it in my study next to my medals, because that check is proof of life. It is proof that the infection is gone. It is proof that when you strip away the lies and the luxury, what remains is resilient." People walk past my table, rushing to get out of the rain. They see an old black man sitting alone with a glass of wine. They probably think I am lonely. They probably think I am waiting for someone who is never coming. They are wrong. I am not waiting for anyone. I am enjoying the company of the only person who has never let me down myself. I spent so many years being a provider, a protector, a silent support system for people who saw me as a resource. I spent years making myself small so they could feel big. I spent years hiding my intelligence so they would not feel threatened. No more. I am solitary, but I am not lonely. There is a vast difference. Solitude is the richness of self. Loneliness is the poverty of self. And sitting here in the heart of Paris with my health, my fortune, and my dignity intact, I feel like the richest man in the world. The waiter approaches a young man with a crisp white apron. He sees my empty glass. "Another glass, monsieur?" he asks. I look at the bottle, then I look at the street. The lights of the city are coming on, reflecting in the puddles. It is beautiful. It is quiet. It is mine. "Why not?" I reply in French, taking pleasure in the role of the words. "Why not indeed?" The waiter pours the wine. He pauses, looking at me. "You look happy today, monsieur," he says. I smile. It is a genuine smile, one that reaches my eyes. I am happy. I say I am celebrating an anniversary. Oh, a wedding anniversary. "No," I say softly, "an anniversary of independence." The waiter nods respectfully and walks away. I lift the glass to the gray Paris sky. I toast the rain. I toast the silence. I toast the empty chair across from me, which will never again be filled by anyone who does not respect me. I toast the old monkey who turned out to be a lion. "C'est la vie," I whisper into the cold air. That is life. And what a magnificent life it is when you finally hold the keys to your own kingdom. Moral of the story: never mistake silence for ignorance, and never judge a book by its worn-out cover. Those who shout the loudest about their superiority often have the least to show for it, while true power sits quietly in the corner observing everything. Respect is not a currency you can buy with fake wealth or arrogant words. It is earned through character and integrity. When you underestimate the dignity of others based on their appearance or age, you are not displaying their weakness, but your own foolishness. The most expensive lesson in life is learning that the person you mocked yesterday might be the only one holding the keys to your tomorrow. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about standing your ground. Let me know in the comments if you have ever had to teach someone a lesson in respect, and share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that the truth always wins in the end. See you in the next story.